Chapter 716. Babla also came early, but this might be her habit. She and Poplar Fruit were both hardworking people. On the 7th floor, some models had already rushed over with their teams. They also wanted to leave a good impression on the instructors. Moreover, they came so early for makeup and could go on stage earlier, so they had 1 or 2 more rehearsals than the others. "Leon, you have improved again," Babla said happily. "You can actually integrate hip shaking, but lifting and other movements into your standing posture. Very good, very good." In fact, these were not difficult for Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit could do the most complicated martial arts movements, so this little difficulty was nothing. However, in Babla's eyes, Poplar Fruit's progress was like sitting on a jet. One day was equivalent to a year's progress for others. After Babla came, Poplar Fruit was embarrassed to let Kiki stay on stage to cause trouble. Although he could ensure that he could study efficiently, Kiki was still next to Babla, so it would still affect her. Poplar Fruit did not want to leave a bad impression on Babla. He hoped that Fangmin could come to help take care of Kiki, but Fangmin was the last to arrive. She was not late, as she arrived before 9 o'clock. However, compared to Matisse and Victor, who had arrived early, there was a difference. Speaking of which, Martis and Victor were usually lazy, and they only came over in the afternoon yesterday. Why did they rush over so early today? What is Matisse doing? Yongle was pressed down on the chair by Victor to fix her hair. Out of the corner of his eye, he glanced at Martis, who was on his right. He seemed to be fiddling with some machine. To install a video recorder. Victor laughed. Video recorder? Recording what? Poplar Fruit vaguely knew the answer, but he still blurted it out. "I'm recording you." After installing the tripod and fixing the DV, Martis walked over and smiled at Poplar Fruit. "Yesterday, I told Mr. Ardle that you are a genius, so Mr. Ardle asked us to film your training." "What's there to film?" Poplar Fruit said weakly. "Film me making a fool of myself? You don't have to be humble, although I know you Chinese like to be humble." Matisse laughed and said, "You are the most talented new model I have ever seen. I observed you for a long time yesterday. If you record it, you might be able to use it as evidence to witness your miracle." Barbara popped out from Poplar Fruit's side and nodded with a hint of hope. "Mr. Matisse is right. Leon, we have faith in you. However, you don't have to put too much pressure on yourself. Just study at your own pace. I hope your camera won't cause Leon any trouble. If Leon feels that he is under too much pressure, I can ask them not to show it in front of you." Barbara said seriously. That won't happen, right, Leon?" Matisse laughed dryly. Before Poplar Fruit could reply, he turned around and saw Kiki standing next to his tripod and looking at it curiously. He immediately cried out in horror, "Little angel, my lady. Don't touch it, it'll break." Matisse ran over and picked up Kiki. Kiki was not afraid. She pinched Matisse's nose and stuttered in simple French, "Sir, my name is Lorgioles." Chi-Chi was quite concerned about her own name. Matisse had no experience in raising a child. He was sweating profusely as he played with Kiki. Fortunately, Fangmin arrived in time and rescued the helpless Matisse. "Kiki, look at what I brought for you." Fangmin took out a big book from a big bag and then took out a colorful box. Girls loved colorful things the most, and Chi-Chi was the same. When she turned around to look, she immediately abandoned Martis and ran over happily. She stuck her head out and asked curiously, "Auntie, what is this?" "This is a coloring book." Fangmin smiled as she flipped through the large book on the table. Inside, there were some blank drawings of small animals on the white cardboard. Of course, on the upper left corner of each page, there was a miniaturized full-color drawing. Fangmin opened the box. There were 36 crayons of different colors neatly arranged inside. Kiki's eyes lit up immediately. Fangmin smiled and said, "These are crayons. Do you see those blank drawings? Kiki will take the crayons and color them later to make those small animals look better." "Are they really for Kiki?" Kiki still couldn't believe it. She blinked her big watery eyes, and the desire in her heart had long been expressed on her face. "Of course." Fangmin smiled. As soon as her voice fell, Kiki immediately cheered happily and ran to her father's side. She pulled on her father's trousers and told him about her excitement. Kiki is going to draw. Draw big flowers and draw beautiful sheep. Poplar Fruit had just finished doing his hair. He looked at Fangmin gratefully and said, "Sister Fangmin, you are really considerate." Poplar Fruit was also grateful to those who treated his daughter well from the bottom of his heart. Fangmin smiled and said, "Yesterday, I saw Kiki looking at the iPad all the time. This isn't very good for children. I read a book before. It said that children aged 0 to 7 should use their hands and brains more instead of passively receiving some information by watching videos. That's why I bought this coloring book." In a strange city like Bali, Fangmin found such exquisite coloring book and crayons for Kiki in just one night. There must be a lot of difficulties that Fangmin didn't explain to Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit cared enough about Kiki, but as a man, there were many aspects that he didn't consider thoroughly. He humbly accepted Fangmin's teachings and remembered it in his heart. In the future, he would let Kiki watch less cartoons and let her come into contact with more novel things to cultivate Kiki's ability to use her hands and brains. Seeing Kiki happily studying her new toys on the table and Fangmin giving her some hints and guidance from time to time, Poplar Fruit felt relieved. He didn't have so much time to take care of Kiki. It was good enough that Fangmin was there. Poplar Fruit went back to the back of the tea stage to change clothes and then began a new day of learning. Seeing Poplar Fruit and Barbara walking on the tea stage, Matisse and Victor looked at each other and smiled knowingly. The two guys intimately held each other's waists and leaned in front of the DV camera. As if they were recording the opening speech, the two laughed and reached out one hand to the camera, bending their ring finger and middle finger. "Ladies and gentlemen," Matisse waved his hand and said. He said one sentence and Victor followed suit. "Next is the reality show, Leon's show," Matisse said in a low voice. "You will see a genius, a new genius model with talent that even God would be jealous of. We will witness his growth." Victor added. "Now, the miracle begins." Matisse and Victor separated and pointed at Poplar Fruit. Well, fortunately, Poplar Fruit didn't see it. Otherwise, he would have been shocked by their exaggerated performance. Chapter 717. The 7th floor of the Givenchy Hall was noisy to begin with. The music of the catwalk was loud and clear, and because there were so many venues and so many models and their assistants, a single word from each of them could turn the entire floor into a wet market. Poplar Fruit's area was relatively quiet because it was relatively remote and there were few people there. However, the noise was definitely not normal. The models on the runway next door were not in the mood to walk. The music was still playing, but they were still rushing forward. The cheers were too loud. This formation was similar to when Martis and Victor came here for the first time. However, the momentum was much greater. Could it be that some superstar had come? Why are they so excited? The only ones who were not affected were Poplar Fruit and Kiki. Yongguo was concentrating on his studies, devoting himself to the adjustment of his bones and the control of his muscles. Perhaps at this moment, only Chi-Chi's voice could wake him up from the world of the tea stage. It was not that he had not tried it before. In the morning, Chi-Chi held her crayon drawings and ran to show her father, and Yongguo had to stop his practice. Kiki, of course, followed her father's example. She was also very focused when she was doing something she liked. In the afternoon, when she woke up, she started a new journey. This time, she wanted to draw a big wolf for her father. For this, Aunt Fangmin asked her to drink water several times, but Kiki was very impatient. However, even though Poplar Fruit was very serious, he could not concentrate anymore because Barbara's attention was attracted to the drawing. "Where's the teacher?" Poplar Fruit was very confused. He followed Barbara's gaze and saw a little princess in a princess dress, accompanied by an elegantly dressed man. They walked through the crowd and walked to the runway. "Oh, Princess Luo Danny is the darling of Givenchy." Barbara clasped her hands over her heart and had an intoxicated look on her face, causing Yongguo to shudder in disgust. Is it really Artel's granddaughter, Luo Danny? Givenchy was here. Accompanying her was their family's ever-smiling and courteous butler. Poplar Fruit admitted that he didn't have a good impression of the rigid butler, but he didn't provoke him. What he said that day was just to fulfill his duty. If it were someone else, he would still say the same thing. Poplar Fruit didn't know that the reason why these people were so excited about Luo Danny was not only because she was Ardle's granddaughter, but also because Luo Danny was a high-priced fashion spokesperson. Although Luo Danny was young and a little shy, she was indeed a little beauty. Her mother had been rated as the most beautiful face in the fashion industry more than 10 years ago. Luo Danny had also inherited her mother's beauty and received a top-notch aristocratic education from a young age. At such a young age, she had already starred in 3 commercials. Among them, the most famous one was when she endorsed the world-class watch and jewelry company, Cartier's new diamond necklace last year. The little girl was still young, but she was already the darling of the fashion world. Yonghua was such an old uncle, but compared to him, he was far from being comparable. When they saw Luo Danny and the others walking over, the group of people behind wanted to follow them. However, the butler smiled and gestured for them to go back. A few of the senior instructors didn't dare to continue flattering Luo Danny. Under everyone's gaze, Luo Danny lifted her skirt and walked to the side of the runway. She looked up and asked softly, "Mr. Leon, may I ask where the angel is? I want to play with her." Poplar Fruit was a little embarrassed. He walked over and jumped down from the stage. He couldn't let my daughter look up at him all the time, right? Of course, even if he jumped down, Luo Danny still had to look up at him. Poplar Fruit saw the butler's murderous gaze and awkwardly withdrew his hand that was about to touch her head. "Isn't she here?" Poplar Fruit pointed to Kiki, who was immersed in her own painting world, and called out with a smile. Kiki's 2 white little hands each held a crayon. She had accidentally drawn a black line on her face, but Fangmin wiped it clean when she saw it. Hearing her father's call, Kiki subconsciously covered the coloring book with her arms. The little girl felt that it was better not to let her father see the unfinished painting. Looking up, Kiki shouted happily, "Luo Danny." It wasn't that Kiki didn't call her sister, but that Westerners generally called people they were familiar with by their names, which made them feel closer. Luo Danny's long skirt was a restraint for her running. After a long time, she slowly moved to the front of Kiki. Kiki had already reached out and called out to her, "Luo Danny, let me show you." Fangmin could no longer stay calm. She gave up her position in fear and stood behind the chair to carefully protect it. With her help, Luo Danny lifted her skirt and sat on the chair. She even said thank you to her, which made Fangmin a little flattered. "Wow, is this your painting?" Although Luo Danny was a celebrity, she still had the character of my daughter. When she saw Kiki open the coloring book, she covered her mouth and asked in surprise. "Yes and no." Kiki thought for a moment and said, "The painting was given to Lorgiel by Auntie, and these colors were painted by Kiki." Of course, there were some complicated explanations that Kiki couldn't understand even in English. She also supplemented it with body movements. Luo Danny had long been accustomed to this kind of communication with Kiki and understood at a glance. "Oh, it's so beautiful," Luo Danny said with some envy. "By the way, who is Lorgiel?" "Lorgiel is me. My name is Lorgiel." Kiki said the last sentence in French. "Dad gave me the name." "Luo Danny, do you want to draw?" The little girl changed the topic so fast that Fangmin, who was next to her, was a little dizzy. Luo Danny excitedly took Kiki's crayons and happily said, "Okay. Which one should I draw for sister?" Kiki leaned on the table and flipped through the coloring book, pondering, in addition to this big wolf, which one does sister like to draw? Big wolf was Kiki's favorite. She was reluctant to share it with others. "What is big wolf?" "Wow, I like this. Big white bear." Luo Danny was no longer a lady. She happily held Kiki's hand and shouted, "How is it a big white bear? It's obviously a polar bear." My daughters began to play with their drawings as if there was no one else around. In fact, Luo Danny's skin was thin, and she was usually very reserved outside. However, she also had a playful heart. Under the influence of Kiki, Luo Danny also became lively. Seeing that they were having fun, Poplar Fruit also felt relieved and went back to the tea stage to continue to study. As for the other people's strange looks, Poplar Fruit naturally disdained to care. Chapter 7:18. So that Asian man has such a background. Originally, the discussion about Poplar Fruit on the 7th floor had gradually died down. After all, everyone had their own things to do. However, Luo Danny's arrival put Poplar Fruit in the center of a whirlpool once again. Of course, they only dared to whisper among a few people. With the Givenchy family around, they didn't dare to slander him loudly unless they didn't want their jobs anymore. He just relied on his connections to get to where he is. Who knows if he betrayed us? Their words were still unpleasant, and all kinds of malicious guesses were exchanged among them. Didn't you see his clumsy performance? I was 100 times better than him when I first went on stage when I was 15. Does that yellow monkey think he can become a model just by relying on his connections? He's too naive. I think we should join forces to boycott him. Forget it. Can an arm be stronger than a thigh? Someone said disdainfully. Speaking of connections, didn't the little princess also rely on her connections? The little girl hasn't even grown up yet, and she's already in a big commercial. I really don't know what he's thinking. This was a female model. When she said this, the air was filled with a sour smell. Oh, master, you should be careful. If word gets out you don't want to stay in this industry anymore? Her assistant pulled her back nervously. I think we should just let him show off. In the modeling industry, strength is everything. If he goes on stage like this, Givenchy will be the one to lose face. Another circle was secretly discussing. I'm looking forward to going on stage with this yellow monkey. Someone said with a laugh.
Why?
Everyone loathed Yonghua, yet his words were so shocking that they couldn't understand. Without the contrast of failure, how can there be the brilliance of a pearl? He proudly raised his head and said, if I go on stage with him, the worse he performs, the better the audience will think I perform. Everyone's eyes lit up, and their hearts began to stir. Poplar Fruit still didn't know that his image among the models had fallen again and again. He had completely degenerated into a clumsy villain who only knew how to rely on his connections to get to where he was. However, even if Poplar Fruit knew about it, he wouldn't take it to heart. No matter how bad their opinion of him was, Poplar Fruit would not try to change it. These people were not important in Poplar Fruit's heart. He was more concerned about becoming a model worthy of Ardle's trust. Perhaps, using strength instead of words to give them a slap in the face would be more satisfying. Luo Danny, why didn't you come over yesterday? Kiki handed a crayon to Luo Danny and also helped her draw a few strokes. Luo Danny wasn't as good as Kiki. She couldn't draw and talk at the same time. She paused for a moment, turned to Kiki and said, because I have to go to class. Oh. Are you going to class like Chi-Chi's daddy? Chi-Chi took the opportunity to draw a few more strokes. After she succeeded, her big eyes narrowed into slits as she grinned. Oh, Lorgiel, you cheated. Luo Danny grabbed Kiki's wrist and shouted angrily. I have a tutor. I have to learn Latin, horse riding, and etiquette. It's so annoying. The little girl pouted and said irritably, I want to play with you, but the housekeeper won't let me play. I can't come out until after class in the morning. Annoying to study? Kiki scratched her head, not quite understanding Luo Danny's troubles. She said in a childish voice, no. Kiki's daddy taught Kiki to speak French. Kiki thought it was very interesting. Luo Danny said with some envy, your daddy is so good. He must be a very gentle and kind person. Hearing others praise her daddy, Kiki laughed happily. She proudly puffed out her chest and said, yes, yes, Kiki's daddy is the best daddy in the world. The two of them drew for a while. Kiki asked, Luo Danny, will you come to play with Kiki in the future? Drawing alone was definitely not as fun as drawing with friends. Luo Danny thought for a moment. She pouted with some uncertainty and said, I don't know yet. I don't know if there are any more trips. I may need to go to Switzerland to participate in some business activities, or I may be asked to stay at home to study by my teacher. I also want to come and play with you, Kiki. Although they didn't speak the same language, Luo Danny felt that Kiki, who was 6 years younger than her, was already her best friend. She was different from her other companions. Chi-Chi was very sincere and unpretentious to her, and she had many wonderful experiences. The difference between the East and the West. When she played with Chi-Chi, she didn't need to wear a mask or pretend to be a lady. In any case, every minute and every second was happy. Kiki was a little unhappy. She took Luo Danny's hand, and the two of them looked like good sisters. She said in a soft voice, "But Kiki wants to play with Luo Danny." "Luo Danny, don't go, okay?" Luo Danny was a little embarrassed. She thought for a moment and said, "No. My butler is very bad. If I don't go, he will tell my daddy." "So bad?" Kiki asked Daddy to beat him. Kiki indignantly looked at the butler, who was standing straight in the distance with a white towel in his hand. She felt that these guys were as bad as Big Bad Wolf. Luo Danny covered her mouth and laughed. She didn't take it seriously, and she didn't think that Kiki's father was very powerful. However, she was still very moved by Kiki's action of protecting her friend. She took Kiki's hand and said, "Kiki, why don't you come with me? Come to my house as a guest, and we can go play together, right?" "But Daddy is not free." Kiki was a little moved. She looked at her father and shook her head regretfully. "It doesn't matter. You tell your father that you will come to my house as a guest for a few days. When you want to go home, you can ask your father to pick you up." Luo Danny said, "I often go to my aunt's house to play." Kiki shook her head without thinking and said, "No. Kiki doesn't want to leave Daddy." If going to Luo Danny's house to play was a tempting cake, then staying by her father's side was a dreamy candy city. Although Kiki liked to play, she didn't dare to imagine how uncomfortable it would be for her to leave her father. One must know that since she was born, except for 1 or 2 times when Sister Bebe came to take care of her, Kiki almost never left her father for a whole day. Especially at night, if her father didn't tell her a bedtime story, Kiki wouldn't be able to sleep. Luo Danny was a little regretful. She sighed like an adult and said, "I really don't know what to do with you. You can't leave Daddy, just like a child." "Kiki is a child," Kiki said with a smile. "Luo Danny, don't be angry. If Daddy is free, Kiki will definitely come to play with you." Luo Danny patted Kiki's little head. At this time, she said like an elder sister, "Well, Kiki, don't worry. If I have time, I will ask the housekeeper to send me here to draw with you." Chapter 719. For the past few days, Poplar Fruit had been practicing day and night. Only in the afternoon would he sneak out and use Matisse's DV to record videos for the children. At this time, Poplar Fruit did not look like he was traveling. Instead, he looked more like a tour guide introducing the local customs and customs of a foreign country to the children. Although it was quite tiring, the children's enthusiastic reactions made Yongwar feel happier and happier than if she were to play alone. Speaking of which, Poplar Fruit was a little regretful. If he had not known the children so late, he would have set up an award for the children who improved quickly to come to Bali to experience the atmosphere of a foreign country, instead of giving the quota to the 2 girls in the French class. Of course, this was just a fleeting thought. Poplar Fruit seriously considered the possibility of this matter. He suddenly felt that this idea was not necessarily a good thing. After all, the difference was too big. Those children lived in the mountains, just like most Chinese people. They might not have the opportunity to step out of the country in their lifetime. If they were to be impacted by the extravagant lifestyle of a foreign country, they might not have the heart to study when they returned. They should not study so hard for the sake of the award he set up. This goal was wrong. Leaving a memento, allowing them to work hard to surpass themselves and rely on their own abilities to obtain the life they wanted in the future. This was the purpose of Poplar Fruit's long-distance education. Poplar Fruit was very tough. When Fong Bebe and Poplar Fruit video chatted, she also said that she blamed Poplar Fruit for working too hard. He had become tanned and thin. In fact, Poplar Fruit was not that miserable. He was not tanned, but he was a little thinner. That was because Babla asked him to restrict his diet for the sake of shape. He had to eat those nutritious meals that were hard to swallow. Then he practiced day and night. During this period, no matter how tough it was, Poplar Fruit would go to the gym to practice boxing. He also used his brain, entering a new field. Poplar Fruit had too much to learn and think about. Of course, he would be a little thinner. However, his body was one step closer to the golden ratio. Fong Beibei's worry and heartache were because of love. When Poplar Fruit told her about his training, he didn't dare to tell her the truth. Even so, Fong Beibei still shed tears of heartache. As a result, Poplar Fruit only dared to report the good news and not the bad news. No matter how much pain and grievances men suffered outside, they had to grit their teeth and bear it by themselves. How could they bring it back and let a woman bear it with them? This was not male chauvinism. This was also love. Because of love, Poplar Fruit had to stand out to block the wind and rain, leaving only the brightest sunshine for Fong Beibei. Yes, Poplar Fruit had been through a lot in the past few days in Bali. In other words, he had become the center of the whirlpool in the fashion industry of Bali and even the world. Even Givenchy was controversial because of him. It wasn't the criticism of the models. If it was just the criticism and slander of the models, Yonghua wouldn't have been affected. One day, as usual, he went to the hall to practice with Barbara. When Matisse and the others arrived, they handed Poplar Fruit several fashion newspapers with a gloomy face. With Poplar Fruit's language ability, it was no problem for him to understand these newspapers. He didn't even need to open them. Almost every headline was about him. Fashion degenerates into vanity. Exposure. Givenchy will do anything to open up the Easter market. Bali Fashion Week does not welcome trashy models who rely on connections. Who is he? Is Givenchy the lover of a big shot? The news came from a model's Twitter account. He had secretly taken some photos of Poplar Fruit's training. Although the photos were taken from a distance and his face was a bit blurry, the photos were taken when Poplar Fruit had just started. From the photos, it could be seen that Poplar Fruit was walking on the runway unsteadily, like a clumsy Donald Duck. Assistant Director Jacques had come to see Poplar Fruit's training yesterday and scolded Poplar Fruit with disdain. Then, he accidentally revealed the inside story that Poplar Fruit had unconditionally occupied a spot in the main show. This caused an uproar on the 7th floor and also caused the model who had exposed the news to be indignant. After he posted Yonghua's photo with exaggerated details, he probably regretted it after causing such a huge uproar. In less than 2 hours, he deleted it himself. However, many people had already reposted them. Even if he deleted them, the photos had already been saved. His Twitter account had also been screenshotted. Even if Givenchy wanted to settle the matter through public relations, it was impossible. Therefore, Poplar Fruit saw these newspapers the next day. In these newspapers, the reporters at most had photos of Poplar Fruit, but they didn't know who Poplar Fruit was at all. One newspaper even guessed that Poplar Fruit was the Prince of China. There was also a newspaper that was very offensive. It used racial slurs to smear Poplar Fruit and the yellow people behind him. It even said disdainfully, "Those yellow people in East Asia are uncivilized. What do they know about fashion? Does Givenchy think that it can open up the Eastern market by inviting an Asian to walk on the runway? It has insulted the entire fashion industry and turned Bali Fashion Week into a money-grubbing fashion week." Not only were they cursing Yonghua, but because of the model's name, Ardal and Givenchy were also criticized and attacked by the media. One of the reporters even shouted, "Ardal, get out of the fashion industries. These bastards." Poplar Fruit clenched his fists. Even though he was usually calm, he was now full of anger. However, when he saw these comments, he felt a little helpless. He wanted to stand up and tell the media that they were wrong. Poplar Fruit couldn't, because at that time, Poplar Fruit still couldn't prove himself with his ability. Although Poplar Fruit felt that he had made rapid progress in the past few days, it was only enough to make him a good model. He might be second-rate in China, but in Bali, or even in front of the models on the 7th floor of Givenchy, he was still a nobody. What should I do? The words in the newspaper about Ardal were like knives, engraving in Yonghua's mind one by one. Closing his eyes, Poplar Fruit struggled. He didn't want to admit defeat, but more than that, he felt endless regret. Opening his eyes, Poplar Fruit looked at Matisse and Victor, who were also in a bad mood. He sighed softly. In his eyes, Poplar Fruit had a trace of determination. Matisse, Poplar Fruit gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, "What does Mr. Ardle want me to do?" "It doesn't matter. I can quit now. Those newspapers still don't know about my news. If I go back now, no one will know whether this news is true or not. As long as we don't admit it, they won't keep pestering Mr. Ardle." Chapter 720. Why did you quit? An old but still loud voice suddenly rang out. Poplar Fruit was no stranger to this voice. He turned around and saw Ardle striding toward them with his gentleman's crutch. "Mr. Ardle, why are you here?" Martis and Victor quickly stood up from their chairs. They were usually quite arrogant, but when facing their boss, they still had to be obedient. "Of course I'm here. Do you think I, Ardle, will be intimidated by the fabricated reports of these reporters? Did Givenchy give up?" Ardle puffed out his chest proudly. His turbid eyes were shining with the light of disdain for the world. Chi-Chi, who was next to Fong Min, saw Ardle's arrival. She didn't know what had happened, but she was very happy. When Fong Min wasn't paying attention, she skipped over and said, "Sir, is Luo Danny here?" Seeing Kiki, Ardle's face softened a little. He smiled and said, "My lovely angel, I'm so sorry that Luo Danny didn't come today." Kiki sighed regretfully. She pouted and said, "I see. Sir, if you see Luo Danny, please remember to tell her that Kiki misses her very much." In the past few days, under Poplar Fruit's teaching, Kiki's French had improved a lot. She said these words in French, although she stuttered a little and mixed in some English words. "I will," Ardle said with a smile. Poplar Fruit asked Fong Min to take Kiki aside. The conversation was a little heavy, and Poplar Fruit didn't think it was suitable for Kiki to hear. "Ardle, I'm sorry. I let you down." Poplar Fruit sighed and looked at Ardle. He and Ardle got along as friends, so there was no need for him to pretend to be humble. However, he also had something to say. Ardle invited him to Bali because he trusted him. Now, because of his lack of strength, Ardle was bombarded. He felt sorry for himself. "What are you sorry for?" Ardle stared at Poplar Fruit, waved his hand, and said, "I'll tell you later." Ardle turned his head and looked at Martis and Victor. His eyes were burning with anger. He gnashed his teeth and said, "Martis, you two are getting worse and worse, aren't you? Did I ask you to come here to threaten and force Leon to go back? Do you still have any respect for your master?" Martis was sweating profusely. He quickly waved his hand and said, "Boss, sir, we didn't threaten or force Leon. We just asked him to read these irritating newspapers." Indeed, when the two of them were fighting for justice, Poplar Fruit suddenly announced that he would quit. Both of them were shocked by Poplar Fruit just now. "Ardle, don't blame Martis." "I said I would quit," Poplar Fruit also said for Martis. Ardle was still angry. He immediately turned to Poplar Fruit and said with disappointment, "Leon, how could you say such a thing? Just a few newspapers made you back off?" Poplar Fruit didn't need to be polite with Ardle. He waved the newspaper in his hand and pointed at the article that asked Ardle to leave the fashion circle. He said, "Hey, Ardle, I'm just thinking for you. You're under too much pressure." Ardle pulled the newspaper from Poplar Fruit's hand, tore it in half and crumpled it into a ball with disdain, and said, "Street tabloids. If Givenchy is afraid of this kind of gossip, we don't need to open our store anymore." Martis said weakly, "Boss, that's the sun." Ardle threw the newspaper ball into Martis's arms, waved his hand, and said, "Throw it away." "Leon, don't worry." Ardle smiled calmly and said, "I'll take care of these outside things. You just need to focus on your training." "Really?" Poplar Fruit frowned and asked. He was not stupid. Although Ardle didn't seem to care, Poplar Fruit still felt that this matter was not simple at all. The news that came out now could be big or small. If someone really wanted to hold on to it, it could be treated as a scandal. Could Ardle just ignore the Givenchy board of directors? His name was not Hubert. Givenchy. He was just a collateral member of the Givenchy family. He was not even the chief designer. Babla. Ardle didn't want to waste time with him. He waved his hand and called Babla over. He looked at the dark-skinned instructor and restrained his aura. Then he said gently, "Babla, I've watched the videos these days. You taught very well. Leon has made great progress." Babla was flattered and said, "Thank you, Mr. Ardal. This is also because Leon is so talented. I just did my job." Ardal tapped his cane and said, "You don't have to be humble like Leon. If I say you taught well, then you taught well." "Yes, sir." Babla lowered her head and said. Ardal turned his head and said to Poplar Fruit, "Leon, I'll take care of the guy who leaked the news." His voice was very serious and firm. He didn't allow Poplar Fruit to plead for mercy. Poplar Fruit hesitated and shook his head. He didn't want to take care of it anymore. "But you can't continue to practice here," Ardal said. "Mr. Ardal." Babla cried anxiously. She had just seen hope from Poplar Fruit. She hurriedly explained to Ardal, "Mr. Ardal, please believe me. Leon can become an excellent supermodel. Please don't." "I know." Ardal interrupted her and said, "I didn't say that he can't practice here. I mean that he can't practice here. Do you understand? More and more reporters are coming here after hearing the news." Ardal said, "We don't have time to waste on those reporters. So Leon and Babla move to my villa and practice." Matisse suddenly understood. He said admiringly, "Boss, you're so wise. We'll tell the public that the report is not true. Then we'll let Leon come out. Then there will be no controversy." "Who said I'm going to do that?" Ardal hit Matisse's butt with his cane and laughed. "No, I'm going to admit it. I'll tell them that Leon was chosen by me. He's the most suitable one for my designs. If anyone is not convinced, I'll see you at the Fashion Week." Overbearing and unreasonable, Ardal told everyone with his straight spine that he would never give in. Poplar Fruit was not like what the novelist said. Ardal's trust was like being injected with chicken blood. However, he was still a little touched by his friend's support. Gently hammering Ardal's arm with the outside of his fist, Poplar Fruit also straightened his chest. He looked at Ardal with firm eyes and said loudly, "Ardal, don't worry. Your vision will be proven. I promise." Chapter 7:21. In the morning, Poplar Fruit and Kiki quietly avoided the reporters who hadn't arrived yet. They returned to Shangri-La to pack their things, then got into Hey Bro Renault's Rolls-Royce and moved to Ardal's villa. As soon as he left, someone came looking for him. The story started in the morning. She didn't have an itinerary today. As a noble, Princess Charlotte didn't need to rehearse like those models. Gucci didn't even need her to walk for the brand shows. With her fame, it was enough for her to occasionally attend commercial events. So today, she was able to sleep in leisurely and slowly eat breakfast in her room. When Princess Charlotte ate breakfast, she didn't read the newspaper while eating like those middle-aged men in movies. Her good upbringing had taught her to have an elegant eating posture. However, although her posture was elegant, her eyes were sneakily looking around. Princess Charlotte was secretly looking at her two bodyguards, wondering how she could avoid them and sneak out to have fun. If that guy was here, I wouldn't have to rack my brains to avoid Atai and the others. A vigorous shadow that had disappeared for a long time suddenly popped up in Princess Charlotte's head.
He's so good at fighting.
He knocked down Atai and the rest of them with only a few punches and kicks. Then I can sneak out and go shopping openly. Sometimes speak of the devil. Although Poplar Fruit didn't appear in person, Princess Charlotte saw his photo. "Hey, Atai, give me that newspaper." Princess Charlotte put down her spoon and pointed at the newspaper that was neatly placed on the desk. Usually, other than her own reports, she didn't seem to take the initiative to look at the newspaper. Atai looked at Princess Charlotte suspiciously and vigilantly. He knew how troublesome his master was. However, as a bodyguard and servant, Atai dutifully handed over the newspaper. Although the photo was blurry, Princess Charlotte could still distinguish Poplar Fruit's figure. It's really him. Even though she was still unsure, she took a look at the contents of the newspaper. Asians, Givenchy, Ardal. These keywords were enough for Princess Charlotte to confirm that this unlucky man was the Tsundra she had met 3 times. That's right, Princess Charlotte called Poplar Fruit a Tsundra.
Why?
This was because Poplar Fruit had bumped into him 3 times, but he hadn't even tried to strike up a conversation with him once. This had caused Princess Charlotte to doubt her own charm. But now, Princess Charlotte blamed it on Poplar Fruit. This man must be too arrogant. He saw me and pretended not to know me. After all, Princess Charlotte was as well known as Prince William in England and Europe. Do you think this is cool? Princess Charlotte thought indignantly. Looking at the sun, which she usually disdained to care about, Princess Charlotte was secretly delighted. Hee hee, you've been caught red-handed, haven't you? Princess Charlotte somewhat believed the rumors in the newspaper. Poplar Fruit was a prince of some royal family in Asia. Otherwise, how could he have received Givenchy's favor? Princess Charlotte didn't feel any model aura from him. Although Poplar Fruit's figure was pretty good the first time they met, and Poplar Fruit's hairstyle was a lot better the 3rd time they met. But which country's prince was he from? Brunei, Nepal, that country with a lot of sorcerers also had a prince. However, the royal family of Brunei seemed to be more low-key. The royal families of Southeast Asia in Brunei were ugly and short. They were different from the men she had seen before. Princess Charlotte was curious again. She raised her head and asked Atai, do you remember the Asian man who pressed you to the ground in less than a second? Atai's face darkened. She really touched on his sore spot. That experience could be said to be the most humiliating experience he had ever had as a royal bodyguard. And Princess Charlotte still described it in such detail. What did she mean by less than a second? He didn't dare to look at the strange eyes of his companions. He braced himself and nodded. Didn't you go to investigate him? Do you have the report?
Let me see.
Princess Charlotte said with great interest as she stretched out her hand. Please wait a moment. Atai stood up, pressed his headset, and whispered into the microphone on his collar for a while. After a few minutes, the information was sent to the tablet in his hand. Princess Charlotte took it, and the first thing she saw was a photo. If Poplar Fruit or Matisse were here, they would be surprised to find that this was the photo they took of Poplar Fruit. Regardless of how it got into her hands, Princess Charlotte looked at Poplar Fruit's slightly curly bangs and deep starry eyes and muttered, "So it's you. You look pretty good." Chinese? There's no prince in China, right? Princess Charlotte was surprised when she saw the following. In fact, it was very difficult for foreigners to get information about China. However, because Poplar Fruit was still a little famous, they could easily get information about Poplar Fruit from some reports and social media platforms. For example, the exclusive interview that QQ News did with Poplar Fruit last year had a lot of background information about him.
Ah,
he's a commoner? Princess Charlotte looked at Poplar Fruit's information and thought with some regret. Sure enough, the newspapers are all lies. In her opinion, there was only the difference between nobles and commoners. Whether it was urban residents or rural residents, these were all commoners. There was no difference. Translator. This person is quite talented. No wonder he can speak French and Italian. Why didn't he say so earlier? Really, he made me so embarrassed. Princess Charlotte was still brooding about how she made a fool of herself. Princess Charlotte looked at the photos of Kiki and Poplar Fruit from his Weibo and felt a little envious. She's really his daughter. She's so cute. He's so good to his daughter. Princess Charlotte herself did not receive such good treatment. Her mother was the crown prince, and her father was also a big shot.
They were not at home most of the time.
How could they compare to Poplar Fruit's strong fatherly love and affection towards Kiki? This guy is a little stupid. He didn't train well and went to be a model for Givenchy. Why didn't he work hard as his translator? Princess Charlotte pursed her lips and thought with some dissatisfaction. He already has a daughter, but he's still so unreliable. No, I have to look for him. In the information in Princess Charlotte's hands, there was Poplar Fruit's room number in the Shangri-La Hotel. Wasn't it just right below her? Her personality was more carefree, and she would do what she wanted to do. Throwing down the newspaper, Princess Charlotte ran to Poplar Fruit's room with 2 bodyguards and knocked on the door. However, she was destined to be disappointed once again. Poplar Fruit had just left with his luggage 15 minutes before she came down. One could only imagine how mad Princess Charlotte would be at this moment. Chapter 722. I have to go to Bali first. Pai Din-1 waved goodbye to Duan Xueqing at the airport. As a specially invited photographer of the Duan family, he needed to go to Bali first. Of course, the Duan family's own buyers would go with him. They wanted to get first-hand information about the new collections of the fashion giants this year before Bali Fashion Week. Like other shops, Fashion Week would become a carnival for them and the world's fashion industry. Duan Xueqing came to see him off, completely ignoring the strange looks of others. Of course, Duan Xueqing didn't know whether she was deliberately angry with her family or sincerely wanted to see Pai Din-1 off. Their relationship was currently in a very mysterious stage. Pai Din-1 added a little initiative to pursue Duan Xueqing on the basis of stable development. Usually, when he came to see Duan Xueqing, he would either bring some snacks that Duan Xueqing liked to eat or a fresh flower that was said to be picked by the roadside. It was romantic, but not abrupt. Duan Xueqing didn't agree, nor did she make a clear statement. However, a few days ago, Duan Xueqing seemed to open her heart to Pai Din-1's pursuit after she learned from a senior that she met at Poplar Fruit's class reunion that Poplar Fruit had a junior in school. However, the good times didn't last long. Before they had time to develop further, Pai Din-1 had to take a plane to Bali. Duan Xueqing had to stay in China for another week because of the progress of her passport. After seeing Pai Din-1 off, Duan Xueqing stood outside the airport and watched the plane fly away silently. Whether the girl was standing in the drizzling alley of Jiangnan or in the bustling airport of Shanghai, her silent expression, her slim figure, and her cold breath always made her feel like a pure white lotus. In September, there was already the bleakness and desolation of the autumn wind. The girl was neither happy nor sad, or she didn't know whether to be happy or sad. Leaving the domestic grudges aside, Poplar Fruit and his daughter moved into the secluded villa in Ardal. After moving into the villa, the happiest person was not Poplar Fruit, but Kiki, who could finally get together with her good friend Luo Danny. There was no need to mention how excited they were when the two little girls met. They ran up and down in the villa, letting their happy laughter fill the whole villa. A few nannies were panting as they followed behind them, afraid that the two little devils would fall or bump into something if they ran too fast. They didn't know how the two of them had such stamina that they couldn't stop playing for an hour. It wasn't until the housekeeper caught them all and took them to the piano room for piano lessons that they finally quieted down. Poplar Fruit didn't know that Ardal had expelled the model who had exposed Poplar Fruit from Givenchy's team. He also didn't know that Ardal had privately informed the other tycoons to jointly ban the model. He also didn't know that Ardal had severely punished Jacques, the assistant director who had caused him to be in a passive position. Ardal didn't want him to know about any of this, just like the reporters who were looking for the man in the photo, like they had been injected with adrenaline. Ardal isolated all the storms from the outside world outside the villa, creating a space for Poplar Fruit to practice, without distractions. Poplar Fruit knew that the current peace was only temporary. The more Ardal suppressed him, the greater the backlash would be. Perhaps a storm was brewing. Yang Wen needed to make use of the little time he had to quickly grow up. In the afternoon, Poplar Fruit trained very hard. In the evening, Poplar Fruit still didn't rest. After Babla went back and Kiki went to bed, he went to the temporary tea stage in the villa and practiced the catwalk over and over again. He had already practiced the whole set of basic cat steps to a decent level, but he still wanted to practice more. He wanted to practice how to use his body's movements and the changes in his eyes to show his inner scholarly and aristocratic temperament. Yang was still remembered that Givenchy had taken a liking to these two qualities of hers. Models with good figures and solid basic skills were not easy to find, but there were still a lot of them in Bali. Her body was shaped by her innate talent, and her basic skills benefited from her hard work. These were not as rare as Yang was two temperaments. Otherwise, how could there be so many aristocrats and celebrities in the fashion industry? It was because their unique temperaments had conquered designers and audiences all over the world. Temperaments were not born, nor could they be obtained easily. They were traces left by personal experience and years of practice. Poplar Fruit wanted to stand out from the other models. He not only needed to build himself from a blank piece of paper to a supermodel with solid basic skills in half a month, but also to show his unique and charming temperament. This was a big problem that even Babla, who had a wealth of theories, couldn't solve. Poplar Fruit needed to explore it himself and find his own modeling path. He set up a DV camera in front of the stage and connected it to the LCD TV next to him. Poplar Fruit would walk on the stage for 10 to 20 minutes, constantly adjusting himself. During this time, he was blind. He didn't know whether he had succeeded or not, but he would use different ways to show each movement. Then, he would rely on his strong memory to record each movement as he walked. Then he would watch the DV camera and evaluate his own performance through the video taken by the DV camera. Speaking of which, he had watched a lot of videos of fashion shows recently, so he had some ability to judge himself. Getting rid of the dross and selecting the essence, Yonghua did not pursue too much. As long as he could find 1 or 2 suitable movements, he would have a great harvest. Poplar Fruit didn't know. He was watching himself in the DV camera. Someone in the monitoring room was also watching him. He practiced here for the whole night? Ardal pressed the rewind button, and the video returned to Poplar Fruit's last show before he stopped. Yes, it's been 3 hours since 8:30, the housekeeper said respectfully. What a hard-working and excellent child. Ardal looked at Poplar Fruit's show with admiration in his eyes. He compared the video that Matisse had brought back for him. The Poplar Fruit now was totally different from the one he had seen a few days ago. On the screen, Poplar Fruit inadvertently wiped the sweat on his forehead. His eyes were still full of concentration, which made people feel a strong sense of shock. Phew, I'm getting old. I'm going to sleep first. You keep an eye on him for me. Give him another half an hour. If he doesn't stop, tell him to go to sleep. Ardal said. His slightly upturned mustache couldn't hide his gratified mood. Chapter 7:23. Come to think of it, if he could go back to the past, would he have made another choice? Ardal didn't know what other people's answers were. He had experienced a struggle before. He couldn't remember why he had chosen Poplar Fruit. The relationship between him and Poplar Fruit was a bit strange. To put it in a poetic Eastern word, it was fate. At first, he had met Poplar Fruit because he couldn't help chatting with him when he was in a foreign land. After chatting with him for a while, he was impressed by Poplar Fruit's French, which was even better than his. Maybe it was a kind of national pride that made him have a good impression on Poplar Fruit. Then, because of his conversation with Poplar Fruit, Ardal was surprised by Poplar Fruit's profound knowledge for the second time. After looking at him carefully, he found that this young man had a maturity that didn't match his age, and he was full of confidence. Maybe he was really attracted by Poplar Fruit's temperament. Ardal wanted to ask Poplar Fruit to find inspiration. Poplar Fruit didn't give him any inspiration, but his daughter, the lovely little angel, inadvertently reminded him. Poplar Fruit's role for Ardal was to help him perfect the initial design. During the street shooting, Poplar Fruit shocked him again. Poplar Fruit's figure and temperament were completely tailor-made for his clothes. Ardal might have forgotten that the relationship should be reversed. His clothes were tailor-made for Poplar Fruit. Once again, Ardal invited Poplar Fruit, who had no modeling experience, to participate in the Bali Fashion Week show. Engrossed in the excitement of his work, Ardal completely forgot that he had invited a guy who knew nothing about runway shows. It wasn't until more than a month ago that he suddenly remembered and hurriedly called Poplar Fruit over for model training. If she could go back in time, Ardal didn't know if she would have given up on inviting Poplar Fruit. Because Poplar Fruit was the most suitable man in the world to wear the China-style clothes he designed. For Ardal, who pursued perfection, this was a dilemma. But now, after watching the video of Poplar Fruit practicing at night yesterday, Ardal finally made up his mind. He would not regret it anymore. It was him. If such a hard-working and talented young man didn't succeed, then there would be no justice in this world. Give him a little more time, Ardal thought. I believe that he and I will give you bastards a miracle. You bastards. He was referring to the group of reporters and paparazzi who had gathered outside Ardal's design studio. As soon as Ardal got out of his car, he was immediately surrounded. Microphones and recording pens were almost stuck into his mouth. Mr. Ardal, Is the news on the internet and in the newspaper true? The reporter asked in a gentle tone. Sir, why do you want to ride on the coattails of Asians? Is it because Givenchy wants to open the Asian market by hook or by crook? May I ask if that yellow-skinned man is your illegitimate son? We know that you have worked in Asia for as long as 30 years. Hearing this question, the veins on Ardal's forehead bulged. Ardal could barely maintain the smile on his face anymore. Fortunately, his bodyguard and driver both squeezed in and used their thick arms to give Ardal a space to move forward. Sir. A group of reporters followed Ardal relentlessly. They were like a group of wrapped dumplings, slowly moving forward. Ardal kept a calm smile on his face and didn't say anything, which made the reporters, who had been waiting for a long time, a little flustered. Finally, they reached the stairs of the design studio. Everyone thought that Ardal was going to walk straight in. Surrounded by his bodyguard and driver, Ardal slowly turned around and faced the reporters condescendingly. Suddenly, the camera flashes lit up Ardal's face, making his face pale. Fortunately, the driver was more experienced. He quickly took out a pair of sunglasses and asked Ardal to put them on. Ardal tapped his crutch lightly. His movement was not big, but everyone knew that he was going to say something, so they all quieted down. Apart from the sound of the shutters, everyone shut their mouths. The so-called report, you all know how much fiction there is in it, Ardal said with a gentle smile. The group of reporters' faces were burning. Some of the newcomers even turned their heads away, not daring to look at Ardal. I'll only say what I'm about to say once, Ardal said slowly, chewing his gum. First of all, the child in the photo is a model I invited. It has nothing to do with expanding the Easter market. It is because he is the most suitable person to wear the new clothes I will introduce this fashion week. Ardal said, raising his index finger.
Wow.
The audience burst into an uproar again. They thought that Ardal would avoid admitting it, and then they would have to go back and make up a story again. They didn't expect that Ardal would suddenly throw out such a big bomb. Now, they could imagine how shocking tomorrow's headlines would be. Sir, who is he? How do you know him? Sir, is the most suitable reason because he is your illegitimate son? When they realized what was going on, a lot of questions were thrown at them. Ardal completely ignored them. He raised a second finger and said to himself, it was so noisy that his voice was covered by the reporters' questions. Fortunately, in order not to miss Ardal's words, they quickly calmed down. As for this model, I will hold him responsible for slander. Ardal had finished the first part of his speech. The audience looked at each other, not knowing what he had just said. However, Ardal wouldn't repeat it for them. The child I chose is an excellent and talented child. If you think he is not good enough, I hope you can come to the main venue of the Fashion Week during the Givenchy show. I invite you to witness his excellence. Everyone thought that Ardal was lying through his teeth. The model didn't send many photos, but as long as they were knowledgeable people, they could see that poplar fruit was not good enough. However, in order not to miss Ardal's statement again, they all resisted the urge to ask questions.
Third, I met this child by chance.
There is no relationship at all. The reporters who just said that he is my illegitimate son, are you questioning my relationship with Lisa? Ardal hit the ground with his crutch, showing his anger. While everyone was still in a daze waiting for his fourth statement, Ardal suddenly turned around, opened the door, and disappeared from the design room. Chapter 7:24. Ardal left domineeringly, leaving behind a group of reporters who had gotten some information but were still far from the truth. They looked at each other in dismay. In fact, they were a little satisfied. After all, Ardal had personally confirmed this fact, so they didn't need to guess blindly. This way, there would be a breaking point in tomorrow's news. Next, as reporters, they also knew that the truth needed to be dug out bit by bit. This kind of exploration with a little suspense was more desirable to the readers of the newspaper. If the truth was revealed all at once, they would feel bored. Well, they had already thought of the headlines for tomorrow's newspaper. Ardal admits to using Asian models. Ardal stubbornly refuses to admit his mistakes. So, excellent? Why don't dare to let him show up? Givenchy Fashion Week is a huge scandal. They could also take things out of context and add fuel to the fire, making things more complicated and confusing. Anyway, they only cared about sales. Givenchy's public relations problems had nothing to do with them at all. At this time, some of the newspaper and online media couldn't hold back. Before everyone left, they had already asked the copywriters in the station to write a tweet exposing the truth. The whole of Bali was once again caught in the storm of public opinion. Bali was in a mess, but it didn't affect Poplar Fruit's practice. His performance today made everyone, including Barbara, praise him. Even Victor shouted that Poplar Fruit had entered the ranks of the top models. Of course, this was a bit exaggerated. Poplar Fruit was still a long way from being a top model. His sense of rhythm, stage presence, and even his sense of the camera were not enough. Perhaps he could be regarded as an A-lister in China, but in the world, he still needed to continue to improve himself. At this time, Barbara actually felt that her ability to teach Poplar Fruit fell short of her desire. Poplar Fruit was like a big sponge, constantly absorbing knowledge from her mind. Barbara kept digging into the various theoretical knowledge she had learned in school. Whether it was useful or not, she threw it all to Poplar Fruit. However, even so, she found that her teaching speed was not as fast as Poplar Fruit's learning speed. From this, it could be seen how awesome Yongguo was. Perhaps, years later, she would write a book to recollect this experience. She felt that she would definitely describe the process of teaching Poplar Fruit with pain and joy. He was very happy to teach Poplar Fruit because Poplar Fruit could learn it quickly. However, she still couldn't fall asleep at night. It wasn't because she was under too much pressure, but because she had to rummage through her school notes to recover her memories of some unpopular knowledge. Sometimes she even had insomnia because she was thinking about how to teach Poplar Fruit. Immersed in the last week of training, Poplar Fruit did not know that far away in Yangqing, China, there was an undercurrent surging at the moment. In a dark alley. Alright, actually, it wasn't dark at all. Not every bad thing needed to be hidden in a desolate corner. It was a busy street, and in front of a famous restaurant in Yangqing, there was a taxi slowly driving over. A man with slick-back hair got out of the car, looked at the signboard, and walked inside. Perhaps, in real life, not many people knew him, but on the internet, he was a big V blogger with more than 5 million fans. Qin Shui. Some second-rate celebrities didn't even have as many fans as he did. Of course, there was no need to mention Poplar Fruit. This guy opened Weibo completely to record Kiki's growth. He had never interacted with his fans. Just by relying on warm and happy photos, he only had about 700,000 fans. Although it could be considered a small fire, it still couldn't compare to this kind of big V. Of course, Poplar Fruit also received a letter from the official website saying that they wanted to give him a V, but it was ignored by Poplar Fruit. Later, it was left unsettled. These big Vs either played some chicken soup for the soul by replacing the old wine with new bottles or collected some jokes to entertain the public. Over time, they also attracted many fans, and their income came from cooperating with some businesses or individuals, doing some copywriting, promotion, and even scandals. These made them earn a lot of money. Qin Shui came over today to discuss a business deal. It was said that she needed him to start a wave of rumors. He had done this kind of behind-the-scenes work many times. In the past few years, he had taken on no less than 10 orders. Now, the price was getting higher and higher, but there were still many people who came forward to give him money. When he pushed open the door of the agreed private room, there was already a person sitting there. If Zheng Yujie saw it, she would definitely realize that that person was Li Zichao's cousin, Li Qingchao. Director Li, why do you have time to summon your little brother over today? Although Qin Shui was older than Li Qingchao's background was something he could not afford to offend. He could only respectfully call himself a little brother. I have something to talk to you about. Why would I look for you for no reason? You're not a great beauty. The words of a hedonistic son were always so blunt. With just a greeting, he could block you until you couldn't speak. Qin Shui was used to the way these people acted, so she wasn't angry. He chuckled and poured a cup of tea for Li Qingchao. He said, "All right, since Director Li is so straightforward, then let's not make it so complicated. Director Li, just say it directly. What do you need me, old Qin, to do?" You're a big V, so of course I want you to post on Weibo. What else? Li Qingchao threw a document bag over to him and picked up the delicacies on the table and tasted them with relish. Qin Shui didn't plan to eat her fill. He took a sip of tea and opened the document bag to read. There were a few pieces of printing paper and a USB flash drive inside. There wasn't much content. It was just an ordinary Weibo photo and a printout of the original Weibo text. Li Qingchao even pretended to print it out in color. It was really a waste of Earth's resources. Qin Shui was a little puzzled. He saw that there didn't seem to be anything explosive in the photo, except that the girl was a little prettier. Then the timing of the photo was very good. The girl turned her head and looked cute. This is what I want you to hype up. Li Qingchao waved his chopsticks and pointed as he said their information is at the back. In a few days, they will be going abroad to participate in the competition. I want you to let everyone know about this photo on the 27th, and you have to make everyone think that this kid is a couple with this woman. Everyone knows. Qin Shui asked. Li Qingchao's words were really too unpleasant, and it was a little difficult to judge the extent of what he said. The kind that causes a sensation in the country. Everyone is going to spread it like crazy. Li Qingchao said impatiently. Remember, the 27th. Qin Shui nodded and then looked at Li Qingchao. Li Qingchao rolled his eyes and threw another craft paper document bag over. This time it was thick. When he opened it, it was filled with banknotes. Li Qingchao said coldly, I know your rules, but I've paid in full. If you don't do it well, you know my rules. Don't worry, Director Li. No problem. Qin Shui smiled slightly. He already had a plan to hype up in his heart. Such a small matter was not considered a challenge to him. Chapter 7:25. Yesterday, Song Jiwen got off work a little late. When he knocked on the door opposite, Chen Anlin was wearing a mask and holding a box of tissues. She was watching a Korean drama with tears and snot. She had moved Song Jiwen's TV over. However, when she heard that Song Jiwen had helped her find a suitable place for the Tai Chi dojo, Chen Anlin immediately wiped away her tears. Her eyes were shining, and she looked very energetic. In the middle of the night, she actually wanted to drag Song Jiwen over to look at the venue immediately. Let me tell you, good places don't come often. Otherwise, you wouldn't have asked people to look for it for more than a month. Chen Anlin muttered to Song Jiwen, if we don't make the first move, someone else will beat us to it. I know. Song Jiwen was wearing sunglasses and driving the Land Rover that Poplar Fruit had left for him. Today, he was wearing a slim-fit, light-colored casual shirt with his sleeves rolled up, revealing his forearms. He looked very capable. Unfortunately, his belly looked a little bit like it ruined his fresh look at the moment. Otherwise, I wouldn't have asked for leave to accompany you today. Song Jiwen said calmly, you're not in a good state of mind right now. You'll suffer a big loss in business. Today, Song Jiwen had actually informed his leader that he would not go to work in the name of going out to investigate. Besides, he was also a deputy section chief, so he didn't have much to do. Otherwise, when he went out for a vacation, he had used up all his holidays. How could he have asked for leave?
How could that be?
Chen Anlin was like a newborn calf that was not afraid of a tiger. She asked with an unconvinced face, I practiced negotiation in school. In terms of doing business, Chen Anlin had always been blindly confident in herself. Especially compared to Song Jiwen, she always felt that she, who studied economics, was better than Song Jiwen, who was a small bureaucrat who studied languages. Song Jiwen smiled and said, You don't believe me? At that time, if you were nervous and acted as if you had to get that venue, would the other party not increase your price? When negotiating, you have to be calm. You have to hide your desires. Only then can you bargain with the other party. It seemed to make sense. Chen Anlin furrowed his brows and said hesitantly, but what if we bargain too hard and the negotiation fails? The originally good venue couldn't be rented again. Actually, if it's not bad, I'm willing to rent it for a little more money. That's not how you do business. Song Jiwen rolled his eyes. Although the other party couldn't see through his sunglasses, he said, starting a business is different from using your family's money to buy clothes and go shopping. You don't know how to cut costs. You add money here and there. In the end, when you do the math, you'll find that you're doing a losing business. Chun Amlin was really good at being an armchair strategist. After hearing Song Jiwen's words and thinking about her own business plan, she felt a little dizzy. Of course, she still listened to Song Jiwen's words and felt that it made sense. Isn't your family an official? Chun Amlin was still a little unconvinced. She muttered, "Why do you seem to know more than me?" Although her family ran a martial arts club, it was now a business. Haven't you heard of a saying? Song Jiwen glanced at her and found that the side of this little girl's face was quite beautiful when she wasn't angry. Society is a university. Your experience in society is far more than what you can learn from reading books. This topic was a little heavy. Song Jiwen thought for a while and pondered over it. He told Chun Amlin a story about him leading a team to attract investment. Although he only attracted tens of millions of investment, the psychological game with the investors was very exciting. Chun Amlin only heard about the macro business war in school. She had never heard of such a detailed process. In less than 10 minutes, Chun Amlin was convinced by Song Jiwen. Okay. Chun Amlin shook her head and said wholeheartedly, "I'll watch from the side later. I won't say anything. You help me bargain." Song Jiwen laughed involuntarily and said, "That's not necessary. I just want you to calm down and face some business problems. You also need to learn how to negotiate with others. Don't mix in English when you speak. I hate this kind of people the most." Chun Amlin frowned and said. Song Jiwen usually spoke like this when he was at work. Most of the young people who spoke Cantonese liked to mix in a few sentences of English. Yang Guo was one of them who was better at switching. When she spoke Chinese, she would speak Chinese. When she spoke English, she would speak English. Okay. Song Jiwen also knew that people in other places didn't like this habit of his, so he restrained himself. That's what I mean. You can't always rely on me to negotiate for you. You started your own business, and I have my own life. I can't accompany you every day to help you, right? Also, you still have to go back to Jean City in the future. Chun Amlin frowned. She felt that Song Jiwen's words made her feel vexed. She waved her hand and entered a state of irritation. She raised her eyebrows and said, Okay. I know that you're reasonable. Drive your car and don't bother me." Song Jiwen looked at her inexplicably and really ignored her. Yongqing City's traffic was quite bad, and they drove for almost an hour before reaching their destination. There were 2 primary schools and 1 secondary school nearby, which they saw when they passed by. At least in terms of traffic, there was a guarantee. They made an appointment with the owner, who was waiting for them upstairs. When Song Jiwen saw that person, he felt that he was an unscrupulous businessman. Why did he say that? Bald, triangular eyes, thin lips, and a wretched expression. No matter how he looked at him, he looked like a villain. When they went in, Song Jiwen's mouth was wide open. Although he had seen the pictures sent to him by his friends, he really didn't know that this place was so big. It's 1,400 square meters. It's big enough, right? We used it to open a restaurant. Then we rented it to someone else as a kindergarten and moved away. The unscrupulous businessman. The bald owner rubbed his hands and said with a smile, 1,400 square meters was definitely an exaggeration. This place was at most the size of 2.5 basketball courts, just over 1,000 square meters. But, according to this location, the rent for such a big place would definitely not be low. When Song Jiwen was talking to the bald owner, Chun Amlin walked around the place and even looked out the window. She couldn't hide the joy in her eyes. While the bald owner turned around to take a call, she secretly pulled on Song Jiwen's clothes and muttered, "Hey, Song Jiwen, I think this place is not bad. It's the same as my 3rd branch. The location, the size, it's too good." This fellow, did she think that others wouldn't know what she was thinking just because she spoke softly? Song Jiwen bitterly smiled. He clearly saw the bald owner's gaze sweep across her face. It was so obvious that anyone could see it. Looks like it's going to be hard to negotiate the price for this place. Chapter 726. Half an hour later, Song Jiwon shook hands with the bald owner with a smile and said goodbye to him. However, Chen Anlin did not have a good expression on her face. She swaggered off in front. It was normal for the negotiation to fail. Song Jiwon had expected this. Song Jiwon walked to the front of the car and saw Chen Anlin kicking the tires of the Land Rover gloomily. He smiled and said, "Okay, let's go back. What are you angry about?" "How can I not be angry?" Chen Anlin muttered. "It wasn't easy to find a suitable place, but you ruined it." Song Jiwon opened the car door and calmly didn't say anything. This made Chen Anlin furious. She opened the car door, climbed in angrily, and turned her face away. Song Jiwon didn't say anything. He knew that he had to avoid the sharp edge at this time. He closed the door and drove away. After a while, Chen Anlin slowly recovered from her anger. After all, she practiced Taiji fist. The calmness of the Taiji fist calmed her temper. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't be angry with you." Chen Anlin apologized. This time, it really wasn't Song Jiwon's fault. Song Jiwon had tried his best to help her negotiate the price, but the other party just wouldn't let it go. Even after they left, the bald owner was still smiling as if he was sure that they would go back. "It's okay." Song Jiwon shook his head. "I know how you feel, but that place isn't suitable for you." Song Jiwon didn't want to tell Chen Anlin that her expression made it impossible to negotiate the price. He had said it once before. It would be too long-winded to say it again. Chen Anlin was an adult. Song Jiwon believed that she would understand when she came to the conclusion. "Why not?" "Because it's expensive?" Chen Anlin asked curiously. She felt that this place was too suitable. It was exactly the same as the third branch of her family. "Expensive is one thing, but the main thing is that it's too big," Song Jiwon said as he looked ahead. "Too big?" Chen Anlin asked in confusion. "Didn't you come to Yangqing to set up a dojo using modern management methods? The more innovative you are, the more you should shrink the scale and reduce the cost of failure," Song Jiwon said. "Didn't you see that when the country wants to carry out reform and opening up or implement new policies, they will always choose one or a few cities as pilot projects? You can't put all your eggs in one basket right from the start. If you do, you won't have the capital to start all over again." Chen Anlin was not convinced and said, "How do you know I won't succeed?"
There's so many schools nearby.
"I'm sure many of these children would like to exercise." Chen Zongdai nodded and said, "You're right. But when you think about it, with such a big place, how many students would be needed to fill it up? Can you teach so many students on your own?" Chen Anlin thought about it and realized that it was indeed the case. Her family had been in business for a long time and had many disciples and grand-disciples. They even had a large number of coaches. Now that she was in Yangqing, she was weak and could not compare to her family at all. However, she still said stubbornly, "Don't we still have poplar fruit?" She always called poplar fruit brother when she called him, but she always called Song Jiwon by his name. This was a problem left behind by history. "Poplar fruit, don't even think about it. He's a busy man and has more things to do than me. He can't help you," Song Jiwon said as he shook his head. "What should I do?" Chen Anlin sat down in the front passenger seat. She suddenly felt that her dreams were getting further and further away from reality. "You have to take one step at a time and eat one bite at a time," Song Jiwon said with a smile. "Changing to a smaller venue will be a good starting point for you." "A smaller venue? When can I find a suitable one?" Chen Anlin said unhappily. "You knew it wasn't suitable, so why did you pretend to be polite with that pervert? He dared to ask for 100,000 yuan in rent. You might as well let him rob it." "The most basic principle of doing business is harmony," Song Jiwon said. "I didn't know if you would insist on this venue, so I couldn't make a promise. Besides, if you don't need it now, how do you know you will need it in the future?" Chen Anlin nodded. She looked out of the car and asked in confusion, "Huh? Aren't you going back? It seems like this road is different from the one we took." The road was still right before, but now she didn't know where it was. Song Jiwon smiled and said, "I didn't say that I would only look at one venue today, right? Coincidentally, there is another venue that we can look at. It's not big, so it might be suitable for you. Really? Chun Amlin sat up happily. She clenched her left hand into a small fist and punched Song Jiwen's arm. She said, "Don't lie to me." Song Jiwen was a little depressed as he rubbed the place where Chin Amlin had just hammered with his left hand. He pretended to be very unhappy and said, "Hey, I helped you, and I still have to be beaten up, right? Anyway, do you think I'm just playing with you?" Chun Amlin brushed away Song Jiwen's left hand. She was in a good mood now, so she didn't care about Song Jiwen's arrogance. She rubbed Song Jiwen's arm to please him and said with a smile, "Okay, don't make a fuss. I didn't even use my strength. How can it not hurt?" Song Jiwen continued to say indignantly, "Laogua said that you practice martial arts. I'm just an ordinary person. You can knock me down with a finger. You're a big man. Is it glorious to pretend to be so weak?" Chun Amlin bickered with him. In the midst of their quarrel, they finally arrived at the second venue. It wasn't far from where they lived.
It was only about 3 blocks away.
If they walked a little further, they could get there in 10 minutes by bike. It's not near the school, but the neighborhood is quite high-end. There are a lot of rich people here. It's a good potential consumer group. Song Jiwen muttered to Chin Amlin when he got off the car. The venue was above a shop facing the street. Maybe it wasn't rented out before, so there were only basic decorations inside. But it was quite suitable for a martial arts center. As long as the floor or tatami was laid out, it could be used directly. It's not big, about 200 square meters. Song Jiwen and Chun Amlin walked to the side and said, "No one rented this place before, so we could get a good price." "It's good, but this is a residential area. How can I attract students to sign up?" Chun Amlin frowned and asked with uncertainty, "Originally, I thought that if there were more students in the school, we could set up some QR codes for them to scan. Then we could do some marketing on Weibo and so on. But now it's all old aunties and uncles. They don't understand these things." Song Jiwen laughed and said, "Don't worry, I have an idea. I'll tell you when we get back." Chun Amlin looked at Song Jiwen hesitantly. He curled his lips and said, "Okay, you have to lower the price a little. I'm afraid that we won't be able to earn enough rent after opening." Chapter 727. Pai Dinwan had been in Bali for more than a day. When he got off the plane, he was separated from the team. To be exact, he never belonged to the Duan family's team. The hotel he stayed in was relatively shabby and was still in the chaotic 20th district. Although it was better than the 18th district where black people gathered, there were more gangs in Southeast Asia. From time to time, there would be groups of 3 people gathered together and stared at pedestrians with bad intentions. Coming to this romantic city, Pai Dinwan didn't go out to walk. No matter how prosperous and magnificent it was, it seemed to have nothing to do with him. He had been staying in the dim hotel room, waiting for his task to be given. This damn place. Pai Dinwan stood up and twisted his body. He hadn't seen the sun for a long time. The air was damp and smelly. Even if he slept, he couldn't sleep peacefully. He smiled bitterly and shook his head, thinking about his bizarre experience in the past few months. He muttered, "Damn, you have the money to frame others, but you don't have the money to treat me to a hotel.
Poor."
Knock, knock. Knock, knock. A dull knocking sound came from the rotten wooden door. Pai Dinwan nervously grabbed the baseball bat next to him and stared at the door with a dignified look. There was no way. This place was too chaotic. He was not sure if there would be a few bandits who would rob travelers. Knock, knock, knock. The knocking sound was a little impatient. Pai Dinwan slowly moved to the door and gently opened the door. The anti-theft chain was still locked. "Why did you open the door now?" The person who spoke in pure Chinese, which made Pai Dinwan sigh in relief. He also found that the voice was exactly the same as the contact he had contacted on the phone. He closed the door, removed the anti-theft chain, and opened the door again. "Why did you come so late?" Pai Dinwan asked. "There's some news here, so the country plans to change its plan of action. Then, we spent some time preparing some things." The person who came was wearing a black cap and a hoodie, looking mysterious. "All right, what exactly do you want me to do?" Pai Dinwan turned his head and said, You know, I'm not a special agent. I'm afraid that I'll mess up some of your operations. The person didn't answer him at all. He took out a brown paper bag and handed it over. He lowered his voice and said, "This is your mission." The Python one shook it and made a kacha sound. There seemed to be many small objects inside, but they were probably not keys because they were very light. He opened it. It turned out that there was a USB flash drive, a mobile phone, and a piece of paper. However, this USB flash drive was a little too much. There were 10 or 20 of them. Was he asking him to sell the USB flash drive? What do you mean? Are we dealing with poplar fruit? Python 1 asked with a frown. There's some information inside. The person said, "You don't have to worry about it. Your task is to send out these USB drives according to the address and contact of the newspaper office." Will they pay attention to me? You know, I can't speak French. Python 1 asked. Speak English. Say that it's a big tip-off about the yellow model of Da Vinci. I'm sure that many people will come to you for it. The person said. Python 1 was confused. He didn't understand French. When he came to Bali, it was as if he was blind and deaf. He didn't know what was going on outside. However, the yellow model should be referring to poplar fruit. He really didn't know what kind of conflict this poplar fruit had with the people behind him. They actually spent so much effort to set up a trap for a few months to deal with him. Okay. Python 1 was still very relaxed. Although this tip-off was not very moral, at least there was no concern for his personal safety. After you finish this, you can go back to the hotel. The person said in a low voice, "Hurry up. You only have tomorrow." Python 1 was stunned. He nodded and said, "Okay. But you have to promise me that you won't do anything to Duan Xueqing." "Let's talk about it later." The person waved his sleeves and turned to leave. Python 1 was stunned for a while. He gently opened the door and looked outside. The spiral staircase was empty. There was no trace of anyone who had been there. The mysterious person came and went without a trace, just like when he came. After sitting in the room for a long time and eating a few mouthfuls of the croissant for dinner, Python 1 turned his head and looked at the bulging craft paper bag. After hesitating for a while, Python 1 took out a USB flash drive. He then took out the computer that he had brought to deal with the photos, turned it on, and plugged it in. In the USB flash drive, there was a Word document with a lot of photos. Python 1 clicked on the photos and saw that they were all of poplar fruit. Some of them were taken from Weibo, and the watermarks on them had not been removed. Python 1 curled his lips. He thought that these people were too amateur. Some of them were screenshots of a store's surveillance video. He could tell that the man in the video was poplar fruit, but he didn't know the other foreign old man. There were also a lot of candid photos. It seemed that the person who took the photos was quite skilled. Python 1 gave him a thumbs up in his heart. The angle and clarity of the photos were very good. Some of the candid photos were of poplar fruit himself, while others were of him and other beautiful women. He had to admit that the quality of the beautiful women that poplar fruit knew was really good. They were comparable to Duan Xueqing.
Oh.
Python 1's pupils shrank slightly. On his computer screen, there was a photo of Duan Xueqing. Python 1 took a deep breath and continued to look. Looking at some of the photos of poplar fruit and Duan Xueqing, Python 1's face was a little pale. Although Duan Xueqing's expression was still cold, that pair of affectionate eyes made him feel as if a knife was piercing his heart. He only had Duan Xueqing in his eyes, and poplar fruit had long been out of his range of attention. If he looked carefully with his experience, he would definitely be able to see that poplar fruit's eyes when he looked at Duan Xueqing were actually very pure. His bright smile was not pretentious at all. In fact, it was just a normal behavior between friends. With a slight sigh, Python 1 swiped his hand and circled all the photos of Duan Xueqing, then used a software to completely delete them. He then opened the Word document. It was full of French. Fortunately, there were photos interspersed in it. Python 1 could guess that this was poplar fruit's blackmail material. He also found the part about Duan Xueqing and mercilessly deleted it. Not only that, he also backed up all the files in the USB drive to his computer. Then, He patiently reformatted the rest of the USB drive and copied and pasted the backup files on his computer. There were more than 20 USB drives. Pai Din 1 busied himself for more than 2 hours before he finished. He did not mind that the bread next to him was already cold. He picked it up and wolfed it down. "Xiao Duan, this is all I can do," Pai Din 1 murmured as he looked at the computer screen. On the computer screen, there was a single photo of Duan Xueqing. She stood slim and graceful among the flowers with a smile on her face. This was the only photo of her smiling that Pai Din 1 could find. Chapter 728. Recently, everyone had become numb to Poplar Fruit's progress. Even Victor, who had gone out for a private job a few days ago, looked at Poplar Fruit calmly and said, "Oh, great progress? That's normal. It would be abnormal if there weren't any big changes." Barbara was still teaching Poplar Fruit theory, but she was no longer the only one teaching Poplar Fruit. Ardal knew Barbara's weakness when it came to stage experience, so he called another instructor from Givenchy. It was Giselle. That's right. She was the tall woman who had pointed at Poplar Fruit's nose and said that she would keep an eye on Poplar Fruit. Giselle was called because she was a model who had won the title of Miss World. She had even been a frequent guest of Vogue when she had been active. Giselle's experience on stage was more than that of all the Givenchy instructors combined. Giselle and Barbara were polar opposites. Giselle had a lot of practical experience, but she didn't have enough basic knowledge because of her low education. Giselle could be called a fashion encyclopedia. She had been sent from a traditional academy but had never really been on stage. However, Barbara's theory was not as convincing as Giselle's experience. Therefore, in Givenchy's headquarters, Giselle was fanatically supported by models, while Barbara was at the bottom of the pack. Ardal called Giselle to make up for Poplar Fruit's lack of experience. Giselle and Barbara each taught Poplar Fruit for half a day, so they could complement each other to a certain extent. Of course, when Giselle came to the villa for the first time and saw Poplar Fruit, she was full of disdain and disdain. In her eyes, Poplar Fruit was a bully. Although the model driven away by Ardal had nothing to do with her, she was also a model, so she had a common enemy. Although Giselle didn't give Poplar Fruit any face, Poplar Fruit still humbly asked her for advice. At this time, he didn't have time to argue with Giselle. He needed to seize every minute, every second, and every opportunity to learn and enrich himself. Otherwise, when the time came for the Bali Fashion Week, how could he prove himself? However, Giselle's dislike of Poplar Fruit came from her misunderstanding of the Poplar Fruit, and not because she wanted to target Poplar Fruit. Just like when she pointed at Poplar Fruit and said, "I'll be watching you." In fact, she still wanted to use strength to decide who was the hero. If you're not good enough and you're still on this seemingly sacred tea stage, then I'm sorry, Giselle will scold you to no end. If your strength is recognized by her, then she will still treat you as a friend. Of course, Poplar Fruit was the latter. In less than an hour, Poplar Fruit had convinced Giselle with his progress and talent. It was every coach's fortune to be able to meet such a student. Giselle wouldn't let go of Poplar Fruit. She did her best. Although she was shouting until her voice was hoarse, she was still in high spirits and didn't feel tired at all. Learning from Giselle, Poplar Fruit seemed to have opened up a new world in front of him. Wasn't his sense of stage performance very weak? In fact, most models were the same. When they walked on the runway, they were generally required to be expressionless. Otherwise, if they showed too much of themselves, they would steal the audience's attention from the clothes. The only things that could affect the stage performance were the model's figure, temperament, and eyes. The first two changes didn't happen overnight. Giselle's change started from the look in his eyes. Originally, Barbara had taught Yonghua how to be calm and indifferent, but Giselle had made Yonghua break this convention. Coldness, laughter, sadness, confidence, and determination, all kinds of emotions were expressed through the eyes. She didn't care how bad Poplar Fruit's acting was. She just wanted Poplar Fruit to create a pair of eyes that could speak in all kinds of extreme emotions. A pair of eyes that could express the mood of the tea stage according to the needs of the clothes and then adapt to it. They could firmly control the atmosphere of the tea stage. If they wanted it sad, it would be sad. If they wanted it happy, it would be happy. If it were Poplar Fruit's friend, the new internet celebrity, actor Chang Yuan's performance would probably be much better than Poplar Fruit's. In the end, Poplar Fruit still lacked a little dramatic performance ability. However, Poplar Fruit had an advantage. When his talent couldn't make up for the gap, he still had extraordinary efforts to push him forward. At night, Poplar Fruit would find some performance books to read and then ponder in front of the mirror for a few hours. The next day, Giselle came again and saw that Poplar Fruit had improved by leaps and bounds. In addition to the stage performance, Poplar Fruit's sense of rhythm was very bad, which was related to his poor sense of music. Every time Poplar Fruit listened to the soundtrack from the stereo, his own rhythm was different. It was difficult to correct. Barbara tried for several days, but couldn't do it. After Giselle came, she taught Poplar Fruit to read the notes in his mind and count the time. Although this method was very unconventional, it had a significant effect on Poplar Fruit's performance on the catwalk. Anyway, the music on the catwalk was actually a single beat, and there wouldn't be many changes. Giselle gave Poplar Fruit a summary of 17 beats, including slight changes. She let Poplar Fruit memorize each beat and how his own pace was. Then, when he went on stage, as long as he adjusted the first step, there wouldn't be any problems. This method was tailor-made for Poplar Fruit. If it were someone else, they wouldn't be able to learn it well. Poplar Fruit's memory couldn't be measured in an ordinary way. In just one afternoon, Poplar Fruit was able to convert these 17 beats into muscle memory. This was a good effect that Giselle didn't expect. Of course, Giselle was used to it. She got along well with Barbara, Matisse, and Victor. In private, she even bet how many miracles Poplar Fruit would perform today. Miracles, other people couldn't even hope for one, but Poplar Fruit's miracles could be counted on one hand. However, Poplar Fruit's progress did make all the people who supported and cared about Poplar Fruit, including Ardal, feel very gratified. Now, Poplar Fruit's ability could be ranked among the nearly 100 models in the base camp, and there were still more than 5 days left. Poplar Fruit still had a chance to continue to improve. Ardal was full of confidence. He was also looking forward to the moment when Poplar Fruit let his clothes shine. Chapter 729. Carrying a heavy backpack, Pai Din-1 appeared on the streets of Bali. After leaving the chaotic neighborhood, Pai Din-1 finally breathed a sigh of relief. His backpack contained his laptop and camera. These were his most valuable possessions since he came to Bali. It was fine to leave his clothes in the hotel, but Pai Din-1 felt that leaving his laptop in the hotel would put him in danger of being burglarized. Pai Din-1 was not in a hurry to go to the place he had agreed to meet. He went to the nearest Bali subway station and found a public service area where luggage and bags were stored. He rented a box for €20 and put his backpack in it. Carrying a backpack with his laptop and camera equipment was also a burden. If the other party changed their mind or wanted to rob him, he would not be able to run away. Pai Din-1 took out an inconspicuous black plastic bag from his backpack. Inside was his mission for today. Pai Din-1 found a public bathroom and went in. He took out 2 or 3 USB drives from the plastic bag and put them in the zipper pocket of his jacket. Then, he squeezed the air out of the plastic bag and tied it with a knot. Then, he pulled open his pants and stuffed it into his underwear. It was a little bulging and looked like a big bird hiding inside. It was a little unsightly. Pai Din-1 pulled up his pants with one hand and fiddled with it with the other hand. He fiddled with it and changed it to a comfortable and inconspicuous position. Pai Din-1 was still a little worried. He patted his pants and tiptoed. When he felt that there was not much effect, he pushed the door open and went out. When he arrived at the street park, Pai Din-1 took out his phone and found the earliest text message. He replied in English, "Southwest of the park, there is a bench under the red street lamp. Sit there and wait for me." It was a bit like a secret agent meeting. Bai Tingyuan did it mysteriously, but he had no choice. He was not familiar with Bali, so it was better to be careful. Seeing a gentle-looking middle-aged man in a suit sitting on the bench with a cup of coffee, Pai Din-1 cautiously looked around. After confirming that there was no problem, he walked over. He went around the back of the bench and sat down beside the middle-aged man. Only then did the middle-aged man, who was looking around, notice his presence. Mr.
Why?
Pai Din-1 reached out to shake his hand.
Oh.
The middle-aged man laughed. He still wanted to joke with Pai Din-1. However, Pai Din-1 coldly said, "Enough with the nonsense. Did you bring the money?" Of course. The middle-aged man took out an envelope from the inner pocket of his suit jacket. "Here's 1,000 euros, just as we discussed yesterday. This is the deposit. The other half will be given to you after we release the news." Pai Din-1 took it and opened the envelope. There were 2 purple 500 yuan notes inside. Pai Din-1 took out one and rubbed it with his fingers. The texture was good, and there were bumps on it. It was the same as the verification method he learned on the internet. "Why, I also need to check the goods." The middle-aged reporter was probably used to this kind of business. He smiled in a relaxed manner and spoke with his strange accent in English. Pai Din-1 did not say much. He took out a USB flash drive from his left pocket and handed it over. The middle-aged man shrugged. He also took out his phone and connected the USB flash drive with an OTG cable. He clicked on a few pictures to take a look. Is it him? Their bodies look very similar. The middle-aged man still had some doubts until he saw the picture of Ardal and Poplar Fruit standing together. "Oh, my God," he could not help but exclaim. "If it's just these few pictures, I wouldn't ask for such a high price." Pai Din-1 shrugged and said, "Look at that document." The middle-aged man opened it and was shocked again. "It's so detailed. Why, how did you do it?" Pai Din-1 smiled and did not answer the question. "I said before that the USB flash drive's information is worth more than the price." The middle-aged man shrugged. This seemed to be his signature move. He only skimmed through it briefly and already felt the value of the USB flash drive. It was more than 2,000 euros. Even if it was multiplied by 2 or 3, he would still be willing to pay. One had to know that the information inside, if used properly, could make the headlines of his newspaper company for a week. Of course, the middle-aged man would not tell Pai Din-1 the truth. He secretly rejoiced in his heart. The Chinese are really stupid. Such valuable information was sold at such a low price. "I've made a fortune this time." Since he had made a fortune, he was in a good mood. He happily took out a second envelope and handed it to Pai Din-1. He smiled and said, "My friend, I've already verified this information. Overall, it's not bad, so I don't have to wait for it to be published. This is the last half of the money, take it." Pai Din-1 took it expressionlessly. He held it in his hand and gently flicked it. Then, he took out 2 large bills and put them in the previous envelope. "Okay, my friend, I can't wait to take it back and study it for tomorrow's headlines." The middle-aged man smiled and stood up. He said, "It's been a pleasure working with you this time. If you have more information, don't forget to look for your friend." Pai Din-1 stood up, nodded slightly, and shook hands with him. However, he scolded in his heart, "Look for you? Only an idiot would look for you." The middle-aged man was about to turn and leave when he suddenly remembered something. He stopped and said to Pai Din-1 with a smile, "My friend, this information, please keep it a secret. It's exclusive to us. You promised." "I promise." Pai Din-1 spat out 2 words in English. "Promise my ass." Pai Din-1 was prepared to sell the goods to hundreds of companies. He would not stop until he was full of these 20 USB drives. Although the person behind the scenes did not say that he could sell the information in the form of a business transaction, he did not say that he could not, right? Pai Din-1 was not worried about what the newspaper companies would do to him. After all, he was a nobody, and they would not be able to find him. They could not come to China to look for him in the future, right? After saying goodbye to the middle-aged man, Pai Din-1 also quickly left the street park. He was not afraid that the man would come after him, but he had to hurry. He took out his phone and sent a text message to the next person. Pai Din-1 wanted to sell these 20 USB drives before the news spread. Behind Pai Din-1, on a pedestrian bridge, 2 men in black stood there with cameras. Is this guy reliable? It took him 2 months. He's okay, but he's a bit stubborn. I'm afraid that he will betray us. It seems like he's a romantic. What are you afraid of? Now that we have these photos, he will die even if he betrays us. Besides, he's a chess piece. He will be thrown away after 2 more uses. What are you worried about? Hee hee. Chapter 730. In the evening, in the bedroom, Poplar Fruit wiped Kiki's wet hair with a towel. The little girl moved around on the bed and refused to put on clothes. The weather was not cold, so Poplar Fruit let her be. Where did Kiki go with Sister Luo Danny today? Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. This morning, Luo Danny asked Kiki to go to a good friend's house with her. At first, Yongwu didn't think it was a big deal. Moreover, Chi-Chi had a longing look on her face, so he agreed. As a result, during lunch, Poplar Fruit found that Kiki hadn't come back yet. Worried, he asked the housekeeper and learned that Kiki and Luo Danny flew Team Geely in Ardal's private jet. Was this going to a good friend's house? They had crossed the border and crossed the strait. Poplar Fruit couldn't help but complain about this. Rich people are really capricious. It was the first time that his daughter had left him to play so far away. Worried, Poplar Fruit behaved a little reluctantly in the afternoon. Although Giselle didn't feel anything strange under his magical multitasking skill, he knew that his heart was no longer on the T stage. Fortunately, before 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Kiki came back. At that time, Poplar Fruit looked in the direction of the villa's gate as if they had a telepathic connection. After a few minutes, Kiki appeared at the door and ran to him with joy. Poplar Fruit felt that he was so easily moved at this moment. He hugged the little Kiki and burst into tears. Therefore, when he asked where Kiki went to play, Poplar Fruit was full of resentment. This resentment was not directed at anyone, but at Poplar Fruit himself. Why didn't he know it clearly in advance? Kiki is taking a plane, a small plane, sob sob. Kiki opened her arms and pretended to soar, but her plane couldn't fly, so she buried her head into the blanket. Yongguo was worried that her daughter would sprain her neck, so she hurriedly grabbed her small waist with her big hands, offsetting her downward momentum. Ha 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 ha's. Kiki thought that her father was going to tickle her, so she rolled around in the blanket and kept twisting. When Poplar Fruit saw this, the corners of his mouth curled up. Originally, he didn't want to tickle her, but the little fellow reminded him. He decisively made her face up to the sky, and her small belly was still bulging out of the quilt. The little girl's mentality was really good. She didn't cry in fear like other children on the plane. When she came back, she thought it was very fun to talk to her father. Well, get up and put on your clothes. Naked, shameless. Poplar Fruit patted his daughter's butt, pulled her out of the quilt, and put on her clothes. First, a white and tender little hand stretched out, and then a fluffy little head popped out. Her big watery eyes were filled with uncontrollable laughter. It was time for her father to tell her a story before going to bed. However, today it was not Poplar Fruit's turn to speak. Kiki held her father's hand and refused to go to bed. She wanted to tell her father what she saw today. There is a cool uncle. He is not as tall as Papa, but his hair is cool. Kiki didn't know where she learned the word cool. She probably learned it in England. Then, who do you think is more handsome, Uncle or Papa? Poplar Fruit asked with some jealousy. In the past, Kiki would not hesitate to say that it was her father. Today, she actually hesitated. She hesitated. Fortunately, the little girl thought about it and said crisply, Papa is more handsome. Poplar Fruit smiled awkwardly and gratifyingly. Cool uncle taught Big Brother how to play ball. Chi-Chi had said, play football in English. Chi-Chi did not know that football was actually called football, so the little fellow could only use the English words she had learned from listening to her explanation. So, is Big Brother Luo Danny's good friend?
Poplar Fruit asked. No.
Kiki shook her head. She held her father's hand and rubbed her smooth little face on her father's big hand. She said comfortably, not Big Brother, not Romeo. Who is Romeo? Poplar Fruit was a little confused. It's Big Brother Cruz. Kiki said, 1, 2, 3, the third little brother. Poplar Fruit understood. He smiled and said, "That is to say, Cool Uncle has 3 sons, and the youngest Cruz is Luo Danny's good friend, right?" Kiki felt that her father was a bit confused. She tilted her head and thought for a moment, then said, "No." "Still not?" Poplar Fruit was completely dizzy. "And she's a little girl. She's so small," Chi-Chi said while gesturing. Poplar Fruit suddenly realized that he didn't guess wrong. Kiki's logic was a bit straightforward. She felt that if the little sister was included, Cruz was not the smallest. "Luo Danny took me to see my sister." Kiki's eyes showed a happy look. "Sister is so beautiful. Golden hair, Papa. Why don't many people have black hair?" Kiki touched her hair and asked puzzledly. "Because golden is the color of angels, and black is the color of angels on earth," Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Originally, he wanted to say that black is the color of fallen angels, but, changing his mind, it's not wrong to interpret fallen angels as angels who fell to earth. "Both golden and black are so beautiful." Poplar Fruit laughed. "Kiki should be very happy." Kiki giggled and nodded. Well, little sister's mama also said that Kiki is very beautiful. It was a bit off topic. Talking about little sister, the topic actually went to hair. Poplar Fruit brought Kiki back with a question. "Little sister can walk and fall. Kiki is amazing. Kiki can walk very well." Kiki said, "Little sister is also biting something soft." Kiki didn't know what that thing was called. Poplar Fruit looked at her gesture and laughed. He guessed that it was the pacifier that babies use to grind their teeth. Poplar Fruit laughed. When Kiki was little sister's age, she would also bite it. "Woo." Kiki shyly covered her eyes, shook her head and shamelessly said, "Kiki didn't." Poplar Fruit laughed heartily. Kiki didn't want to. She got up and wanted to cover her father's mouth. After playing for a while, Kiki was also sleepy. She lied on the bed with her eyes in a daze and told her father about the other things that happened today. "Kiki, go to sleep.
Don't talk.
Daddy is here with you." Kiki, who was about to fall asleep, was very dependent on her father. She held Poplar Fruit's hand and didn't let go. Poplar Fruit always stayed with her until she fell asleep. "Papa," Kiki murmured. Kiki also wants a little sister." Kiki's voice became softer and softer, and the last part was almost inaudible. Was she talking in her sleep? Poplar Fruit smiled bitterly and used his other hand to brush away Kiki's bangs on her forehead. "Of all things, I want a little sister." Poplar Fruit looked kindly at his daughter, who was gradually falling asleep, and thought to himself, "Daddy has suffered a lot to raise you. Do you want another one?" Fawn Bebe's appearance appeared in his mind, and the corner of his mouth revealed a smile. "Even if you want, you have to ask the baby to agree to it." Chapter 731. When he woke up, the whole of Bali was in an uproar. Was it about Ardal that was overwhelming? The news of Givenchy and a Chinese man with a strange name swept through all the newsstands. Almost all the newspapers that could be found were about them. What was more interesting was that every newspaper that listed the news as the headline swore that it was their exclusive news. Then, the public expressed, "Are you insulting our intelligence?" Almost every newspaper had the same breaking point. The pictures might be different, but the content was almost the same. It looked as if it was April Fool's Day, and all the newspapers had united to celebrate together. Of course, some newspapers had a different point of view. For example, Mercado Sun used the fact that Poplar Fruit had many relationships with women to hype it up, and then fiercely criticized Givenchy for not choosing the right person. A lot of the information inside was made up by their own imaginations, as if it was real. There were also some less mainstream newspapers that said that Poplar Fruit was confirmed to be the son of a government official.
Why?
Because some of the photos showed him standing with Zheng Yujie, and Zheng Yujie's background was also exposed. She was the descendant of a high-ranking Chinese official, and it was speculated that Poplar Fruit was also the son of a government official. This was also used as ironclad evidence that Givenchy wanted to bribe a high-ranking Chinese official and enter the Chinese market through crooked means. Even so, the content of their articles was more or less the same. This also led to a lot of internal arguments in many newspapers. Didn't you say it was an exclusive news? Are you out of your mind? Your bonus for this year is gone, and I'll deduct 2 months of your salary. Go back and reflect on yourself. Many reporters who were cheated by Pai Din-1 and the people behind him hated him to the core. They gritted their teeth and wanted to drag him out and chop him into pieces. However, they could not find Pai Din-1. Pai Din-1, who had carried out the farce, was currently staying in the hotel where the Duan family's team was staying. He was smiling from ear to ear as he counted the money. Some reporters paid in full, while others only paid in half. Of course, Pai Din-1 did not plan to ask them for the money back. Now, he had earned more than 150,000 euros, which was more than 1 million renminbi. Enough. Enough.
Huh?
However, Pai Din-1 didn't know how much trouble Poplar Fruit and Givenchy would have to deal with these revelations. He didn't want to know because even if he knew, he wouldn't turn back. Because Poplar Fruit was practicing in the villa, he didn't know that there was an uproar outside and on the internet. Martis and Victor were the first to know about the situation. They had the habit of reading the newspaper in the morning. When they saw the news, they jumped out of their chairs in shock. The exposé in the newspaper was so detailed that even Poplar Fruit's friends didn't know about it. So Leon's name is Guiyang. What a strange name. Victor hadn't seen the end yet, so he didn't realize how serious the situation was. I still like to call him Leon. Martis was too lazy to talk to him. He quickly stood up and called his boss to report. Ardal was old. If he didn't have anything to do, he usually got up late. Today, like a few days ago, he was woken up by the housekeeper. Holding a glass of water, he sat on the edge of the bed and listened to Martis's statement. The more he listened, the darker his face became. Finally, he couldn't help but throw the glass to the ground. Martis was so scared that his whole body froze. Who is it? Who has messed up my plan again and again? Ardal was so angry that his chest heaved up and down violently. Originally, he wanted to launch Poplar Fruit in a low-key way and then surprise the whole world at the Bali Fashion Week. The more mysterious Poplar Fruit was, the more attention people would pay to the clothes designed by Ardal. This was a small marketing strategy. But now a small part of his plan had been exposed, and then all the information about Poplar Fruit had been exposed. Ardal even began to wonder if he was unlucky this year. One after another, Ardal even suspected that there was a mastermind behind all this, including the model who had exposed the news before. Finding the newspaper, Ardal began to read it. The more he read, the more shocked he was. Ardal, who knew Poplar Fruit well, knew that most of the information exposed in the newspaper was true, and some of it was fabricated and exaggerated. But these fabricated and exaggerated news had dragged him and Givenchy into the mire that they couldn't wash off even if they jumped into the Yellow River. Damn it! Ardal clenched his fists and thought unwillingly, if I had 4 more days, no, 2 more days, I would definitely shut all of you up. He slowly walked to the independently decorated big house where Poplar Fruit was training. Now, Poplar Fruit had begun to wear the 3 sets of 16 styles of clothes designed by Ardal and started to train. Although he hadn't worn them well yet, he believed that in a few more days, Poplar Fruit would be able to perfectly show the elegance of these clothes. Under his close watch, he had changed his unreserved trust in Poplar Fruit. But would he be able to hold on for a few more days? Ardal was a little worried. He knew that he didn't have the final say in Givenchy. After all, the previous rumors were unreliable. After Poplar Fruit was hidden by him, these rumors gradually stopped stirring up trouble. Now, the rumors had become a scandal. Although many of them were false news that could be sued for defamation, there was no way that so many newspapers could report at the same time. Public opinion was powerful. Even if it was false, others could also turn it into true. No matter how big Givenchy's business was, it couldn't withstand so much gossip. Besides, weren't there so many people who couldn't wait to see Givenchy make a fool of himself? Ardal didn't need to think about it. He knew that the board of directors would definitely talk to him today. Those untalented, incompetent, and gutless guys didn't know what art was. What kind of decision would they make? Would they make him bow his head and apologize to the public? Would they ask Poplar Fruit to go back to China? Would they ask him to completely withdraw from the fashion industry? Ardal didn't dare to think about it anymore. He left the room, returned to his study, and sat there in a daze. Although Ardal was involved in some operational matters, he was still a designer. When he encountered something beyond his control, he couldn't calm himself down. Panic, nervousness, discomfort, unwillingness, and even a little powerless frustration. Who could save him? To save his struggling design dream. This storm, no, it should be called a storm, alarmed everyone in Bali. The news even spread all over the world through the internet. Ardal wasn't the only one who was furious because of this news. In Monaco, there were people like him who threw their cups to the ground early in the morning. Chapter 732. Princess Charlotte was very unhappy, and her face had been dark all morning. She had gone back to Monaco to celebrate her brother's birthday. When she woke up in the morning, she didn't know that such a big thing had happened in Bali. It wasn't until her best friend called her to gossip about the matter that Princess Charlotte found out that Poplar Fruit, who she had been indignant about a few days ago, had made the headlines again. However, when she saw the news on the internet, Princess Charlotte couldn't stay calm. She found that the news was so familiar. In fact, at that time, her bodyguard asked for information from Zhonghua in his official capacity. What he got was basically all the real information about Poplar Fruit. When she saw the news on the internet, it would be strange if she didn't find it familiar. Princess Charlotte ignored the photo. She had already fallen into her own preconceived notions. Could it be that I was the one who leaked this information? She found Tai and another bodyguard. Princess Charlotte looked at him sternly and asked angrily, Tai, did you leak it? Tai was confused by her question. He usually didn't read the newspaper. How could he know what Princess Charlotte was talking about? Princess Charlotte saw the two bodyguards looking at each other. It didn't seem like they were faking it. She snorted and pushed out her computer to show them. Princess Charlotte pulled up the report, which happened to be the report that best matched their information. Tai was sweating profusely. He quickly waved his hand and said, "Your Highness, please check. We didn't leak any information." Princess Charlotte looked at them in disbelief and said, "Did you report the conflict between him and us to the higher-ups? Is this revenge? Didn't I tell you not to tell my mother everything?" Tai lowered his head and said guiltily, "We really didn't, Your Highness. This time, we really didn't report it." This was also a humiliating experience for him. Poplar Fruit didn't look like a bad person, so he secretly hid it. Maybe a hacker hacked into our iPad and got hold of this information. The quiet bodyguard next to him said shockingly. Even though the iOS system was known as the hardest system to crack, it wasn't really unbreakable. In the future, the incident where iCloud was hacked and various celebrities' photos leaked hadn't happened yet. However, wasn't there a hacker team that cracked it every time the system was updated? Princess Charlotte's face darkened. What else was leaked? No more, no more. The bodyguard swore. This batch of iPads is new, and there isn't much information on them. Your Highness, please rest assured that we will definitely get to the bottom of this. Princess Charlotte was extremely annoyed. She waved her arm and chased the two of them out. Frowning, Princess Charlotte scrolled through the Twitter of a few media outlets that she often followed. They were all one-sided scolding Poplar Fruit, saying that he was a coward, that he was incompetent, and that he was a playboy who wanted to enter the fashion industry to play with women. In any case, there were all kinds of nasty and malicious speculations. Even Givenchy was being scolded so badly that it gave people a feeling that he was about to collapse. Princess Charlotte felt that she was the only one who knew the truth. Was Yonghua a person who wanted to curry favor with those in power? Princess Charlotte didn't think so. Although Ardal hid his works well, he only hid them from the general public. The top echelons of the fashion industry had already collected the new designs for the Fashion Week and sent them to them. Princess Charlotte had seen it before. It was very creative clothing. If it was done well, it might even lead to a new trend. For a designer, this was a masterpiece that they would never be able to create again in their lifetime. Would Ardal casually ruin it on someone who relied on connections? There must be something special about Poplar Fruit for Ardal to value him so much. Of course, it was probably because of these excellent works that other brands were afraid of them, causing some media outlets to follow suit and slander Givenchy. As for Ardal's pursuit of fame and fortune, Princess Charlotte felt that it was a joke. Although she didn't know why Poplar Fruit's good side was ignored by those media outlets, she knew that Poplar Fruit was a talented man. This could be seen from his profile. A man who was fluent in 13 languages was definitely a genius. How could this be called incompetent? A playboy? Princess Charlotte was even more furious. If he was a playboy who liked to play with women, why would he ignore her? Although Princess Charlotte wasn't narcissistic, she was still one of the top 50 beauties in the world. Of course, Princess Charlotte wasn't unhappy with Poplar Fruit because he didn't like her. Princess Charlotte had seen Poplar Fruit's daughter. She was a delicate and cute little girl. Maybe that man had given all his love to her. How could such a loving father be a playboy? Thinking of Kiki's big, watery eyes, Princess Charlotte felt very guilty. She still felt that she was the one who leaked the information. No. Princess Charlotte stood up and slammed the table. Her hand was a little painful. I have to do something. At this moment, Princess Charlotte's sense of justice was bursting. She felt that even if she wasn't the one who started this farce was caused by her. If she wasn't curious and asked Atai to collect information about Poplar Fruit, he wouldn't have fallen to this point. Calling Atai over, Princess Charlotte said, "Go and arrange a plane. I'm going to Bali now." Atai was surprised and reminded her, "Your Highness, there's a banquet tonight."
I'm not going.
I have something urgent to deal with. Go arrange it now. Princess Charlotte said directly. Atai nodded and walked out with the walkie-talkie. As a member of the royal family, how could they not have a few private planes? It took less than an hour to go from Monaco to Bali. After Atai left, Princess Charlotte called her agent in Bali and asked him to arrange a press conference for her. "Do you need to announce anything?" the agent asked curiously. "Just make the arrangements," Princess Charlotte said, avoiding the question. She didn't hold a press conference in Monaco. She didn't want her agent to know what was going on. If they knew about her plan, in order to protect the reputation of the royal family, they would never let her say anything. Princess Charlotte was planning to act first and report later. The plane flew across the sky and flew to Bali. At this moment, there was a new situation happening in Bali. Chapter 733. A group of uninvited guests had arrived at Ardal's villa. They were not reporters, but people from the headquarters of Givenchy. The one in the lead was followed by 5 or 6 bodyguards, assistants, and so on. It was a grand scene. When Ardal received the news from a director close to him at the headquarters, his face darkened. At that time, the director did not say who the visitors were or what they were here for. However, Ardal was very depressed. These people did not give him a chance to defend himself at all. They directly sent people here to give him the final verdict. He even sat in the hall of his villa in a fit of pique. He did not welcome them or give them a good face. He also had some shares, so he had the confidence to do so. However, when she saw who it was, Ardal was stunned. Her tense face relaxed involuntarily. "Ardal, what's wrong? Don't you welcome me?" Taking off his sunglasses, a middle-aged man with a beard, who was much more handsome than Victor, stood at the door, smiling slightly. His French accent was very awkward, and his large tongue was obvious. "Ricardo, you're here." Ardal was surprised. He could not sit still anymore. He quickly stood up and greeted him. "Ricardo?" "Tisci, the chief designer of Givenchy." No, he should be called a master. If there was one man in Givenchy that Ardal admired regardless of age, it must be Ricardo. He was not yet 40 years old, but as early as 30 years old, he had been the chief designer of Givenchy. His achievements in fashion design could be said to have created a new era. He used young, inspired, and wild design ideas to bring the old-fashioned brand to a new height. Before him, there had never been such a young designer in an old fashion house. Of course, Ricardo also had his limitations. In the field of men's design, his achievements were far less dazzling than those of women's. Because of this, when Ardal came back from China last year, he found Ardal's potential in men's design. He spared no effort to cultivate him, hoping to set Ardal up as the second flag of Givenchy. That was why the relationship between Ardal and Ricardo was like a teacher and a friend regardless of age. Some people felt that Ardal was more like Ricardo's teacher in terms of age. That was why Ardal was both surprised and happy when he saw Ricardo. He was worried that those directors, who only knew how to read reports, would not understand the art of giving instructions blindly. But now Ricardo was here. Others might not understand, but he did. "You've brought us a lot of trouble," Ricardo said with a smile. He stretched out his arms and hugged Ardal. Ardal smiled gloomily and said, "Ricardo, you know, we can't know what will happen in the next second from God. So, when I woke up, I found that things were already so bad. Perhaps you shouldn't have hired someone who isn't a model." Ricardo shrugged and said, "I know you told me that Leon is just an ordinary person, but he did bring us trouble." No, Ricardo. That's all in the past," Ardal said excitedly. "You don't know how talented this boy is." "Okay, Ardal, listen to me." Ricardo clapped his hands, and Ardal stopped talking. Although he was young, Ardal didn't have many achievements in the design industry. Compared with the dazzling Ricardo, he was much less qualified. "Ardal," said Ricardo in his French, which had a beautiful cadence but a broken pronunciation. "I believe you understand why I am here today." Ardal nodded. "You should feel lucky that I'm here. That means there's still room for negotiation." Ricardo smiled and said, "As usual, you have to persuade me. I'll give you a chance. If I can't persuade him, you know, that young man will have to go back to his country. In order to protect the reputation of Givenchy, you know, business is business." Ricardo's smile was very charming. If he were in the camera lens, countless women would scream. It was a pity that he was gay, just like Matisse and Victor. Ardal nodded again and said seriously, "No problem, Ricardo, I can show you." With Ricardo alone, Ardal entered the independently renovated runway house from the side door. Poplar Fruit was training on the stage at the moment. Below the stage, Kiki and Luo Danny were like the audience, happily sitting on the chairs and watching their father's performance. Poplar Fruit had already known about the news about him. At noon, when Giselle came to take over the shift, she told them. Poplar Fruit felt indignant and helpless in the face of the rumors. He looked at the news on his mobile phone. Many of the photos that Che and Yuan had secretly taken of him before, as well as the photos that he had never seen before, were exposed. Zheng Yujie, Fong Beibei, and some other innocent girls who had stood and talked with him before were all uploaded on the internet. What made him even angrier was that Zheng Yujie's background information was also dug up. He didn't know who was targeting him and had so much power to investigate, as if they wanted to kill him. Poplar Fruit didn't care if he was scolded, but Zheng Yujie was innocent. Her information was dug up, and it would definitely have a bad impact on her family. Poplar Fruit didn't see Duan Xueqing's photos, and he didn't notice it. He was just worried that the peaceful lives of the girls he was familiar with would be disrupted by him. Fortunately, the only good news was from Fong Beibei. When Poplar Fruit called in the morning, the baby was already packing her luggage. They would take the plane to America on the morning of the 27th, which was tomorrow night. Poplar Fruit believed that the news wouldn't spread so quickly in the country today, and when they arrived in America, it would be a semi-closed camp. As long as Poplar Fruit didn't leak anything, Fong Beibei shouldn't be affected in the state of the competition. Of course, this wasn't a storm of public opinion that Poplar Fruit could control. He could only calmly swallow this anger into his stomach and practice as if nothing had happened. Kiki was deceived by her father. She was still naively discussing her father's performance with sister Luo Danny. Recently, the little girl began to speak French more smoothly, and Luo Danny was especially happy to communicate with her in French. Giselle was experienced. Although she didn't see any ripples on Poplar Fruit's face, she knew that Poplar Fruit was already suppressing the anger in his heart. He practiced desperately just to fight for his dignity. But did he still have a chance? Giselle, who knew that there were many dark secrets behind the rich, was worried. Chapter 734. When Ricardo and Ardal came in, Giselle saw them. She covered her mouth and was so surprised that she couldn't make a sound. She even forgot to press the button for Yonghua to play the music on the runway. Who was Ricardo? He was the god in the hearts of every Givenchy person. Not to mention Giselle, who had worn Ricardo's clothes and walked on the runway to enjoy the last glory of her modeling years. After the surprise, Giselle understood that Ricardo didn't come here for her. His purpose was only poplar fruit. Can poplar fruit pass his trials? Giselle looked at Ricardo, who was smiling all the time. She was worried. She knew that although Ricardo was always smiling, he was actually an extremely picky man. This was not only reflected in his design concepts, but also in the final selection of models for the Fashion Week every year. At this time, Giselle saw Ardal make a gesture to keep quiet. She understood that Ardal wanted her to keep quiet. This was also good for Yonghua. Who knows, he might be able to perform even better. Poplar Fruit didn't even notice that someone had come in. He stood on the stage and silently waited for the music to start. In his mind, he was thinking about what he had learned from the analysis of the video with Giselle. He was immersed in it and naturally didn't pay attention to other people's movements. For this set of clothes, the shoulders can be a little bit lower. My shoulders were too wide before, so it was easy to stretch casual clothes into a military uniform. Also, when you step with your left leg, remember to slightly turn your face to the left. This can show a confident temperament. Giselle pressed the music. She didn't give Poplar Fruit the best choice. After a few days of training, Poplar Fruit could easily play all kinds of show music, although he still couldn't tell the beat. When the music started, Poplar Fruit immediately stopped moving. He broke free from his thoughts. He seemed to have integrated into the stage, but also seemed to be detached from the world. His eyes and his hair fluttered gently. They all looked so real, but at the same time, they were like a 3D movie, ethereal like smoke. This feeling, this temperament. Ardal's eyes widened. He didn't even care that there was a master judging the fate of Poplar Fruit standing next to him. He felt that he had been led by Poplar Fruit into the artistic conception that he wanted to create with the design of the suit. This set of clothes was the main theme of the series of splashing Chinese fashion that he was going to launch. The seemingly messy ink actually implied the mystery of the 8 trigrams of the East, and also had the poetic light and darkness of the rainy days in Jiangnan. Of course, Ardal didn't only care about Eastern culture. Among his other clothes, he also designed a handsome short-sleeve shirt with a standing collar, a suit jacket with a splash of ink pattern, and a shirt with a wolf totem surrounded by messy inks. That was right. Ardal's clothes were just that capricious. For the first time, he gave up on the colorful combination of colors and used only the monotonous colors of black, white, and gray to create the artistic conception he wanted to create. Among the new products, the most difficult one to show off was the one that Poplar Fruit was wearing. It wasn't about how difficult it was to show the artistic conception, but whether such a strong, splashing Chinese style could be shown in a way that Westerners could accept or even like. Erasing the cultural differences between the East and the West was one of the most difficult problems in the fashion industry. But Poplar Fruit did it. His performance was a bit like the craze brought about by Kung Fu Panda at that time. The audience would like the simple and honest panda who was skilled in Kung Fu. They would also like Yonghua's graceful steps, and they would also like the faint melancholy that he reflected with his clothes that were not as prosperous as a bundle of books. Well, not bad. It wasn't Ardal who said that. It took him a long time to get out of the artistic conception created by Poplar Fruit and then to reflect on the meaning of the words that came out of Ricardo's mouth. Ricardo, you also think he's good? Ardal asked impatiently in a low voice. His eyes remind me of Baggio. It was as if Ricardo was standing in front of him, the legendary football player of his country, Roberto Baggio. His blue eyes were filled with melancholy, which made the whole world feel sad for him. But Leon seems to have a strong determination behind his melancholy. His current performance can be said to be a perfect match for your clothes. Ricardo couldn't help but make such an exaggerated evaluation. Although only Ardal heard it, it was enough to make Ardal puff out his chest proudly. In fact, Ardal didn't expect Poplar Fruit to perform so well. When Ardal visited in the morning, Poplar Fruit was still trying to get used to his clothes, but the Poplar Fruit he saw in the afternoon was like a different person. It can't be. Is he really that Leon? Ricardo asked confusedly.
Why?
The reports I saw said that he was very weak as a model and that he was not popular at all. Ardal held back his laughter, but he couldn't help but smile slightly. At that moment, Ardal felt like he was the master of the house. He waved his hand casually and invited Ricardo to go out with him. Come, I'll show you something. Ardal couldn't help showing off the video of Poplar Fruit to Ricardo. The video he had taken for more than 10 days recorded the growth of Poplar Fruit from a model to a supermodel who could be ranked among the top models in the world. However, they didn't know how much misunderstanding they had caused Giselle when they turned around and left. Seeing Ricardo open the door and leave, Giselle opened her mouth, but her heart gradually sank. In fact, she felt that Poplar Fruit's performance just now was perfect enough. Even she, who had rich experience, was impressed by Poplar Fruit. But why was Ricardo still not satisfied? Giselle stood there stiffly. After a long time, Poplar Fruit patted her, and Giselle woke up from her world of thoughts. Giselle, I need you to watch the practice video with me and see if there is anything you can improve, Poplar Fruit said to Giselle seriously. Kiki ran over and gave her father a thumbs up. Poplar Fruit just kissed his daughter and asked Luo Danny to take her out to play. Poplar Fruit felt the urgency of time. He couldn't waste any more time. Oh, okay. You've been practicing for 20 minutes? Giselle asked in surprise. She had agreed with Poplar Fruit to have a summary every 20 minutes. She didn't expect that nearly 20 minutes had passed because she was in a daze. Yes. Poplar Fruit answered briefly. Then he pointed to himself in the video and asked Giselle, Giselle, look here. Should I look at the middle a little bit and use my eyes to see through the void to strengthen my momentum? He was far from satisfied. Chapter 735. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Ricardo and Ardal came out of the monitoring room. He was still clapping his hands with a smile. The first time he said it in Italian, and the second time he said it in English, which everyone was familiar with. There were dozens of huge videos, but they only chose one video to watch every day, Xiao Duan. This was enough to surprise Ricardo, who was not stingy with his compliments. Ardal was not much better. After watching the video again, he was still deeply shocked by Poplar Fruit. Hearing Ricardo's praise, he also felt proud. I have never seen a model like him. He has such a magical talent. I'm afraid even God would be jealous. Ricardo exclaimed. If Miss Hepburn is like Mr. Gavinci, Maria Carla Muse, and Mr. of Poscano is your artistic muse, then Leon is also my male muse. Ardal said proudly. Ricardo looked at Ardal in surprise and said, You still think so highly of him. Poplar Fruit's talent as a model really amazed him, but when it came to the muse level, it was not only the talent, but also the value and blessing that the muse brought. Yes, I got a lot of inspiration for design from him. That's why I chose to believe in him at the beginning. If I design clothes, he must be the most charming person in the world. Ardal said confidently. At this time, Ardal was no longer worried that Poplar Fruit would be fired. Poplar Fruit's excellent performance had obviously convinced Ricardo, who was famous for being strict and fastidious. With Ricardo speaking for him, the senior management would not say anything. Ardal, have you signed a contract with him? Ricardo smiled. This child is an excellent model. His present and future are limitless. If we don't sign, Louis Vuitton and Armani will be at risk. Louis Vuitton and Armani will flock to it like a flock of ducks. After all, the East is a huge market. Ricardo had already begun to think about the long term. However, he did not expect Ardal to smile bitterly.
What?
Don't tell me that our Gavinci doesn't have the qualifications and attractiveness to do so. Ardal shook his head and said, No, it's just because he's not interested in it. Leon was a translator. He had his own career and life. This time I came to Bali mainly because I invited you as a friend. No wonder. I was wondering why he was still unknown with his talent. It turns out he wasn't in the modeling industry to begin with. Ricardo laughed and said, however, look at how serious he is. He must like our industry. That's right, under the spotlight, receiving the attention of the world. Wear the most fashionable clothes, put on the most beautiful makeup, enjoy both fame and fortune, and have a bright future. Ricardo opened his arms and said intoxicatedly, if you ask him again, he will definitely accept our invitation without hesitation. Ricardo was too arrogant. What he said was exactly what Poplar Fruit didn't need. Poplar Fruit didn't need any fancy or fashionable clothes or makeup, as long as they were comfortable for him. He also didn't like to live under the spotlight, as long as he lived a peaceful and happy life. Otherwise, he wouldn't have preferred to stay in school instead of being active in the glamorous venues as a fellow student. Of course, Ricardo couldn't be blamed. He lived in this circle, and everyone around him was eager to become famous. It was normal that he didn't understand Poplar Fruit's way of thinking. When they returned to the big rehearsal house, Ricardo was shocked as soon as he entered the door. A fierce aura hit him in the face. If Poplar Fruit was an elegant and melancholy prince before, then now Poplar Fruit had turned into a proud and domineering prehistoric wolf. Of course, this was also caused by the huge contrast, but the actual effect was not so terrible. While they were still watching the video in the monitoring room, Giselle, who was worried about Poplar Fruit, decided to take a different approach. She called Poplar Fruit, who had run back to the stage, and asked him to change into the wildest and boldest set of clothes in Artel's collection. To be exact, it was only half a set because Artel didn't design a top at all. Instead, it was just a pair of sportswear pants, which had the same splashing style print. Around the knees of the pants, two faintly discernible wolf heads were drawn with inks. If you looked closely, you would find that the two wolf heads were very lifelike. As the knees moved, the wolf heads seemed to be baring their teeth, which was very scary. Without a top, Poplar Fruit had to go on stage shirtless. At first, Poplar Fruit refused to sell his body to attract people's attention. But Giselle sternly lectured him, as a model, you have to abandon your prejudices and reservations. Some of our female models' clothes even have see-through lenses, but they still go on stage, don't they? Poplar Fruit didn't think there was anything to be proud of. However, he had to change into the clothes backstage. With his upper body bare, Poplar Fruit was a little restrained on the catwalk, which made him lose his standard. Of course, the strong muscles on his upper body still made Giselle's eyes shine. At this time, you have to completely abandon your previous temperament. Be flamboyant and wild, do you understand? Giselle waved a pole and said excitedly. Giselle was also a little excited by Zhang Xian's strong pheromones. Wild? Poplar Fruit didn't understand. He had never experienced this before. With his personality, it was very difficult for him to do that kind of action, let alone simulate this kind of feeling. After walking twice, Poplar Fruit's performance was not satisfactory. It didn't mean that Poplar Fruit had failed because of this set of clothes. He was still trying and improving. It was just that Giselle's requirements were too high. She wanted Poplar Fruit to show the standard she wanted to see immediately. That was too difficult. Poplar Fruit needed time to think about changes. Giselle was worried that things would be irreversible after Ricardo went back, so she wanted to take pictures of Poplar Fruit's wonderful performance as soon as possible to change Ricardo's mind. Giselle knew that Ricardo liked models with exaggerated clothes. If Poplar Fruit could control the wolf head underwear, Ricardo would definitely choose to keep him. However, it seemed that the wildness couldn't be compatible with Poplar Fruit for a while. Giselle had a headache for a long time and finally thought of another way. Fierce? Poplar Fruit asked strangely. Yes. Wild wolves were ferocious. They want to destroy people's confidence with their teeth and tear the whole world apart. He didn't know how to be wild, but Poplar Fruit was familiar with the fierceness. He was a martial arts master who had killed enemies with his own hands. Not to mention the murderous intent hidden in his body. Even if he raised the momentum of Xingyi boxing, it was not something that ordinary people could look directly at. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.